Live and cracking across the internet. We want to make sure that we're broadcasting broadcasting's actually broadcasting here on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and so on. And once we can confirm that we're live and you can actually hear me, then we will go ahead and get started. And it looks like we are there. We're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the beautiful, always sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped to represent thousands of good people facing criminal charges. We help them navigate the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, in our lives, sometimes we hit some bumps in the road and we need a little bit of help to get things back on track. And so that's what our team does. Now, as a criminal lawyer for literally a long period of time, years and years and years, we have seen some major problems in our justice system. I am talking about problems with prosecutors. We have misconduct from prosecutors. We have judges who are not particularly interested in enacting just justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people who are at the top, the ones who write the rules, pass the laws that they expect the rest of us to follow, who sometimes don't follow them so well themselves, which is what we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about today, specifically politicians and how they are running our elections. If you're not a regular of the program, we've been spending a lot of time since November 3rd, analyzing a lot of the election litigation lawsuits that are spreading around the entire country. Today is literally 1 month out. 1 month ago today, on November 3rd, we had the election that never ends. It just keeps going and going and going because of all of the problems. And the people who are responsible for the problems are the politicians themselves, the ones who write the rules on how these things are supposed to be run. We're going to be spending a lot of time in that today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the new claim out of Wisconsin. So President Trump issued a new lawsuit. They filed a new claim in the district court out in Wisconsin. We're going to be spending some time talking about it. It's an interesting complaint. There's some new ideas here in this lawsuit that I think are worth diving into. So we are going to spend a lot of time doing that. I've got a lot of the text of the lawsuit, very, very long lawsuit, some of it a little bit heavy, but some interesting claims because they're kind of going after this whole thing differently. They're going after the people who run the election themselves now and saying they were a willful part of the misconduct. So we're going to be talking about that. We've got some interesting information that comes out of this lawsuit, some indications about where some of the funding was coming from, in particular from some names that you know over from Facebook. We have new affidavits that are a part of the lawsuit that have new information there. And then we're going to transition a little bit and revisit some of the clips from yesterday. Remember when we were on the program here yesterday, Rudy Giuliani was in Michigan having another one of his press conferences, and there were some sound and bites and some clips that I thought were worth revisiting. So we're going to talk about those as well, because this hearing, these legislative proceedings are, they're sort of semi-Trump rallies, but at the same time, these are people who would be willing to go into court and testify. And so we want to see what they have to say, whether they're credible or not. There's some good testimony. There's some, questionable testimony. So we will get into that. And then we're going to wrap up the show today with Arizona, my home state where I was born and raised. Arizona has a lot of stuff that is going on as well. Yesterday, we heard from Arizona Chairwoman. Her name is Kelli Ward. She has filed a lawsuit against some individuals here that is seeing some interesting activity in terms of audits and finding that a certain percentage of the votes really should have been for Donald Trump, according to a very small, very interesting audit. So we are going to talk about all of that and more today, and we're so grateful that you are here. So if you're not a regular of the program, now's a good time for me to remind you to hit that subscribe button. We want to have you back. We go live every day of the week, during the week, and we want you to be a part of that program. Also, a good time to hit that like button. Since we just started the program and the broadcast, that's going to help YouTube recommend it to the other people who are out there who may not hear about the show, so they can come on in and join us for the live chat. We are going to be answering a lot of your questions and the super chats at the end of the program. So the format of this presentation is I will talk for about 45 minutes to an hour about some of the case law, some of the news. Then at the end of the program, we'll be able to address your questions with those super chats and the other questions that Miss Faith, who's right back there in the office behind me, she captures those for me, queues them up so I can knock them out at the end of the program. So let's get into it. Enough of the introduction. So as I mentioned, we want to start with Wisconsin. This is an interesting lawsuit. And let's start at the very, very top, because there is a lot we can glean from something that you might otherwise just gloss over. If you're not an attorney and you just kind of want to look at the juicy stuff, the meaty information, the red meat at the end of the lawsuit, you can certainly go do that and say, well, what do they want here? And you can do that here, but let's start at the top. Let's start at the very beginning. This is the main cover sheet. This is the page. This is the header of the lawsuit. And what we can glean here is that originally it was filed, or it's currently filed, in the United States District Court. So that's a federal court in Wisconsin. And pay close attention to the parties here. So you'll see it says Donald J. Trump, the candidate for president, is the plaintiff. Now, this is a little bit different than what we've seen in some other lawsuits, and here's what I mean. Ordinarily, in a lot of the other lawsuits that we've covered, we saw that this was Donald J. Trump, his campaign was filing the lawsuit. It was some congressperson who was not part of his campaign filed the suit. It was maybe the electors, the people who are going to be disenfranchised if they lose. So it's not Donald Trump, but it's the electors of the state who are filing the lawsuit. We've seen some nonprofit organizations or some for-profit organizations. We've seen the Republican National Committee get involved. This is none of those people. This is just Donald Trump, candidate for president of the United States of America. And so the claims are necessarily going to be connected to Donald Trump. We're not talking about, how this is going to impact the electors. This is Donald Trump. And so you want to keep that in mind. He's saying that every one of these allegations that we're about to go through, they impacted him personally as an individual and as a candidate for president, not some of the other people, like these abstract concepts like, well, the voters were disenfranchised. And we're seeing that a lot of courts around the country are dismissing those complaints on that basis, that the person filing the suit doesn't have any authority to bring the suit, and they say he has no standing, and so they dismiss those claims. Well, this is Donald Trump, right? And he's filing the suit in his personal capacity as a candidate for president. Some other things we can note here. Secondly, who are the defendants? Who is Donald Trump suing? And so you're going to see this big long list of names here, and it's everybody who's involved in the election process. So we'll see it's talking about the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Everybody involved there. Ann Jacobs, Mark Thompson, Marge Bostelman, Dean Knudsen, so on and so on. We've got a number of people in their official capacity. So Scott McDonald, we're going to talk about. He's the Dane County Clerk. We have George Christensen, who's the Milwaukee County Clerk. We have the Milwaukee Election Director. We have the Director of the Milwaukee Election Commission. We have Mayor John, Mayor Crowder, Mayor Eric Genrich, all in their official capacities. And then we get to some of the names that we're familiar with, the Wisconsin Secretary of State and the governor in their official capacities. So this is everybody involved in the entire operation of the election, including some of the very local individuals from the county clerks, the election directors, everybody who's a director of the election commission, and even the sort of the lower level people, right? The people who are in charge of running the election. This is a little bit of a different claim, and we're going to see this as we go through, that the claim is against these people. They were willfully, maliciously, in some extents, manipulating the election. They were part of the executive branch. They were part of an organization. They were part of a government entity that was literally operating outside of the bounds of what the legislature had already dictated. So everybody involved in the election. And the final thing that we're going to glean from this, just the very first page on this thing, is the attorneys. So who is filing this complaint on behalf of Donald Trump and his team? We're going to see it's somebody named William Bach. We have James Nauer and we have Kevin Coons. They're all looking like they're Indiana attorneys, and it was signed by William Bach, all as attorneys for the plaintiff, Donald J. Trump. And so we're missing some names that we're used to seeing here. We're used to seeing Rudy and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and some other individuals, but this is a little bit different. These are other attorneys. And now I don't have full access to the rest of the exhibits or any of the other documents currently. And so they may be submitting motions to appear or to make an appearance on this case in sort of a limited capacity, pro hoc vice. And, that could be coming. But what we see right now is it's not the usual suspects. It's not the names of the individuals that we're used to following. So that is just the very beginning of this. And I will tell you, when I was reading this lawsuit last night, I wanted to kind of clip the whole thing and read the entire lawsuit to you, but it's a lot. So we're not going to do that. But my point is there's a lot of interesting stuff here, and I think it's a good lawsuit. I think as these lawsuits are progressing, they're getting a little bit better. Donald Trump and his team, they seem to be, sort of losing some of these lawsuits. We see this a lot on Twitter. Oh, his team's 1-39, 1-40, 1-41. They're getting better. New information is coming out, and I think this lawsuit is onto something. These claims, I think, are the types of claims that the Supreme Court would entertain, less so than a lot of the other claims about Dominion being hacked by some people from Venezuela 25 years ago. All of that information I think is good and relevant, and we want more information, not less. There's smoke over there. I think it's worth investigating. But these types of claims that are making these separation of power arguments that are really going in and saying the executive branch or some entity of the government is divesting the legislature of their lawful constitutional authority to operate the government, that's a problem. That's something that the Supreme Court may sink their teeth into. So let's spend some time on this one. This is a good one. All right, so we kind of go through the complaint. One of the first questions that this attorney has to bring up is the idea that the government should get involved on a federal level. So remember, we live in a government it's called federalism. We have a federal government and we have local state governments. It's a very, very important part of our system, of our society. And many people sort of don't think of it that way because it's kind of been blended together all of our lives. We just think of government as, one big Goliath that just kind of over encompasses everything. And it's hard to distinguish between state and federal differences, what the purpose is. Why do we have that duality there? Well, for very, very good reason. One is to keep the federal government out of our backs all the time. We don't want this overarching federal government that can just come down and just sort of displace the entire state government. We want some distance there. And the founders, I think with great foresight, structured it that way so that we're just not constantly under the thumb of the federal government. Remember, the federal government has certain powers and authority, but the rest of it is delegated automatically to us in the states. And one of the most important components of our Constitution is that we have those rights and those powers reserved. Now, the federal Constitution also talks about the ability of the states to run their own elections. Remember, that is all given to the government, given to the state governments by the Constitution itself. It says that the elections shall be governed by the legislatures thereof the states, not the governors of the states, not the secretary of states, not the judges in the state, by the legislatures. And we're going to be talking about why that's so important because there's some good language from some of the founders, from some of our founding fathers as to why it's structured that way. So when you think about that, this is a long way of saying, all right, well, if there's a lawsuit in Wisconsin and Wisconsin is having issues with their elections, well, why are we even dealing with Wisconsin? Why should the Supreme Court get involved? Why should the federal district courts get involved? Why should the federal government get involved with the local issues when the United States Constitution says those are local issues and the legislature has to deal with it? Well, the issue here is that the local state election implicates a federal president. Right? And so now it becomes a question. And I've seen some commentary from some of the legal people, on Twitter and some of the different blogs that I check out that say the federal government shouldn't get involved, kind of laughing and spiking the ball and saying, well, these idiots, they're filing federal question lawsuits, but the federal government shouldn't be involved because their own arguments say it should go back to the legislatures. I'm digressing a little bit. We have to get this question out of the way. And this attorney does a good job of that. He says here in paragraph 27, he's quoting here, he says, a significant departure from the state's legislative scheme for appointing presidential electors or for electing members of federal Congress presents, and it's underscore here, this is a quote from Bush versus Gore. It says it presents a federal constitutional question that this court must answer. That's directly coming from Bush versus Gore. It goes on, it says, the constitutional delegation of power to the state legislature means that the text of the state election law itself, and not just its interpretation by the courts of the state, take on independent significance. So that is saying that this is an issue for the federal courts. This is an issue for the federal government because the lower level states, the local states, I wouldn't call them lower level. They're on, I would say, on equal footing in many ways to a certain extent, but it's something where they are not allowed to interfere with a federal election if it's going to implicate a federal position. So in other words, they could run their local governor races, their local secretary of state races, or any of those other individual state races on their own, and the federal government couldn't get in and get involved. But because this election, which we're presuming under this lawsuit is fraudulent, that is going to implicate a federal position like the president or a senator. And so now it becomes a federal issue. And so this gets that out of the way, I think. And it needs to be addressed because if this lawsuit does get dismissed, it might be on some grounds like this. So we want to just address that. And I think it makes sense. Wisconsin, if they have a poorly run election that implicates their electoral votes, that's going to implicate the U.S. entirely. And so now it becomes a federal issue. All right. One of the interesting things that they talk about is this old Latin phrase called ultra vires. And they talk about this at the very beginning of the lawsuit. And it says Latin. It says it means beyond the powers. This is sort of the theme of this entire lawsuit, which is why they started with this. And ultra vires or ultra virus, however you want to say it, there are a number of different pronunciations, but it says beyond. It means beyond the powers. It describes actions taken by the government bodies or corporations that exceed the scope of power given to them by laws or corporate charters. When referring to the acts of government bodies, for example, legislatures, a constitution is most often the measuring stick of the proper scope of power. And so we're going to see a lot of this concept that the government was delegated some power by the legislature, and some people who were in charge of executing the laws, they exceeded the scope of their powers. They were acting in an ultra vires manner. They were doing things that was outside the scope of their constitutional authority. So that's the big theme. That's the umbrella that we're talking about. And everything that we get into is going to fall under that umbrella. So let's now take a look at some of the specifics. So it says, at number 28, at the heart of each violation of the Wisconsin Election Code that are described in this complaint was the purposeful disregard of thoughtful legislative safeguards meant to prevent absentee ballot fraud and to promote uniform treatment of absentee ballots. And they did this in a number of different ways. So they're saying there was a purposeful disregard for the thoughtful legislative safeguards. And so think about this. The legislature, the people who you elect in your House or your Senate who are local, they pass laws, and you got to presume that they're passing these laws for good reason. They've thought about it. They've given it some measure. They've had debate about it. They've read it in opening arguments, and they've had backs and forth between different sides, committees, and all that stuff. So when they pass the rules, you have to intend that they have some meaning. They've thought about these issues, obviously, before. So if you deviate from that, that's a problem. And this complaint describes the different mechanisms by which they deviated from that. Under the first paragraph here, and I'm just clipping this stuff out. Like I said, this is a massive lawsuit. Number one, A, ignoring or compromising state law limits on the availability of mail-in balloting for those reasonably able to cast a ballot in person. Okay. So I had not thought about this previously. Largely, the idea of mail-in ballot, in my mind, has always been sort of a matter of convenience. It's just easier to mail in a ballot, right? I mailed in my ballot this last election because I didn't want to go down there and wait in line. I didn't want to go and spend all my time standing in line, dealing with the corona, dealing with people. It's just easier for me to I know who I'm voting for, pull out the ballot, sign it, send that puppy back in. But what they're saying in Wisconsin is that that's not what this is for. Mail-in balloting is problematic. Absentee voting by mail is problematic. So the legislature says we're going to only grant that in very limited, very specific instances. We're not going to be just making that universally available. And to me, that was like, oh, well, that actually makes sense. Nobody told me that. I thought we just all got to vote by mail. But now they're saying, no, in Wisconsin, we said specifically you don't get to vote by mail, largely because we know already that mail-in balloting, mail-in voting is ripe for fraud. And so the initial part of this complaint is saying that the statute under Wisconsin says that if you're reasonably able to go vote, if you have the ability, the capacity to get off your butt and go down to the polling place, that is highly preferred. That is given priority. There are only certain exceptions where we're going to let you vote by mail, but you got to give us some justification for it because it's so problematic. We want you to be in person. Give us a reason, we'll let you vote by mail. So the lawsuit continues. That's just the first part of it. It goes on. It says that proliferating unmanned mail-in ballot drop boxes. So we saw a lot of mail-in drop boxes. These were just sort of set up all around the state. We have processing and counting vast numbers of mail-in ballots outside the visibility of poll watchers. So despite Wisconsin law, there was a lot of people who were processing the ballots outside of any observation taking place. They reduced or eliminated the mandatory voter information certifications for mail-in ballots. So we're talking about eliminating safeguards like signature or addresses or names or any of that stuff that is part of normally going and voting in person. You don't get to do that with a mail-in ballot. Now we're going to talk about that. And then number E, which is where they're talking about permitting ballot tampering. So these are the 5 different things that this lawsuit identifies as problematic. And when we're talking about this ballot tampering stuff, it's this curing process. It's the idea that if a ballot comes in and it's got 2 votes or it's missing a vote or something, that the people who are performing the tabulation, they're going to cure the ballot. They're going to have the authority to go in there and fix it in a way that they feel is okay. And the problem with that is that if the procedures aren't in alignment, if there is the opportunity for some subjective interpretation of what to do with that ballot, meaning if I look at a ballot and you look at a ballot and we can have a reasonable disagreement about it and we both do whatever we want with that thing and there's no strict procedure in place, then the idea is that one of those ballots is going to be counted more than another one. And so that is not okay. All right, let's move on through the lawsuit. So we'll see here. It says that number 30, it is the policy of the state of Wisconsin that voting by absentee ballot is in contrast to the constitutional right of in-person voting. So it's a privilege exercised wholly outside traditional safeguards of the polling place. The legislature finds that the privilege of voting by absentee ballot must be carefully regulated to prevent the potential for fraud and abuse. And this is, as we see here, this is part of the Wisconsin statute. So this is literally written in the law. This is not something that, some bureaucrat somewhere is just making up. This is written, Wisconsin statute section 6.84. You can see it right there. It is there, clear as day. It's in the law. It's underlined there in red. All right, so let's move on. We're going to go over to the next part of this lawsuit. It says, as explained, plaintiffs here seek a very precise remedy to uphold the exclusive authority of the Wisconsin legislature. So they want to protect the legislature. They're not saying they want to divest the legislature. They're saying it was granted in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Plaintiffs here seek a declaration and preliminary and permanent injunction that the practices of all of these election officials infringed and invaded upon the Wisconsin legislature's prerogative. They want this court to immediately remand this matter back to the Wisconsin legislature to review the nature and the scope of the infringement. So they're making a case here for the legislature. They're saying this is a travesty. The executives here, the government, the state government, the people who are enforcing the election took this away from you, legislature. They're not allowed to do that. That's a problem. And they want to give that back. So as we go on, we're going to see in the case of, this is where we sort of see some of the, let's go over here. Thus, in a case of a law enacted by a state legislature applicable not only to elections, but also to the selection of electors, the legislature is not acting solely under the authority given to it by the people of the state, but by virtue of a direct grant of authority made under Article 2, right? So that's saying that the people, the legislature, they're the ones who get to decide this stuff. The next part of the lawsuit goes on, and I said there's a lot of text here, but let's kind of fly through some of it. They say it is not accidental that the Constitution allocates the authority to direct how presidential electors will be chosen to the state legislatures. Okay, and to them alone. It's not going over to the executive officers, not to judicial officers or to administrative officials. It's all going to the legislatures. The Constitutional Convention delegates, and they said that the legislature was the most responsive to the people and the most democratically accountable. Which is exactly right when you think about it, right? The judges are typically not elected, they're appointed. The governors also appoint a lot of people in these commission boards and so on. And so the true branch of government that is most closely related to the people, it's the legislature. It's the people that we vote for on a small scale. That's where we want the power to stay. And as we continue on, the lawsuit goes in and it explains here that Wisconsin public officials, they misapplied a special provision of the Wisconsin law called the indefinitely confined or the indefinite period of disability exceptions, undermining Wisconsin election law and permitting likely tens of thousands of voters to improperly vote absentee without complying with Wisconsin's photo identification law. All right, so that's a lot there. Couple things we have to analyze. Number one, what is this indefinitely confined? What is this indefinite period of disability? Because this is the law that was exploited in order to get some additional ballots in front of the registration, in front of the registered in the voter rolls. And then by using that specific provision, this indefinitely confined, this indefinite period of exceptions, one of these exceptions, that's going to mean that the voter identification, the photo IDs don't matter anymore. Let's dive into it. I'm going to explain what that means. They go on. They say, as explained below, in 2020, a number of public officials in Wisconsin's largest municipalities contended that COVID-19 rendered voters indefinitely confined because of age, physical illness, or infirmity, or disabled for an indefinite period. It permitted tens of thousands of voters to vote absentee without a condition of age, illness, or infirmity that rendered them indefinitely confined or indefinitely disabled. Then they go on and they talk about specifically here what happened in March 29th. All right, so let's back that up a little bit. COVID-19 is saying that you are automatically indefinitely confined because of age, physical illness, or infirmity. Tens of thousands of voters can vote absentee now because of COVID. So on March 29th, the Wisconsin Elections Commissions, they issued this. They said to all of their election officials in the state that during the public health crisis, many voters of a certain age or at-risk populations may meet the standard of indefinitely confined until the crisis abates. So they just took a big bucket of voters who are not really indefinitely confined and put them in that bucket. And that gives them certain privileges when it comes to registering to vote in the state of Wisconsin. So what we're going to see here is that that is in violation of the law. This guidance contradicts the statute here, 6.862A, which requires an actual and verifiable physical or temporal condition being presently experienced by the voter. It was to justify an application for an absentee ballot based on indefinite confinement or indefinite disability and not on just general fear or apprehension. Contrary to the express terms of Wisconsin Election Code, the pandemic alone, according to the election boards, say that this is enough to justify an absentee ballot. These limited exceptions to the photo identification requirement really only under the law apply to qualified retirement and care facilities, military and overseas voters, and absentee voters who automatically receive ballots as voters as indefinitely confined because of age and indefinite period or whatever. That's not essentially allowed. So you can get it if you're indefinitely confined or you're a person who's disabled for an indefinite period. That's okay. But it needs to be, as we explained previously, something where there's a verifiable physical or temporal condition. So we don't have that now with COVID. So contrary to Wisconsin law, this lawsuit estimates that there are over 150,000 individuals who were permitted to vote on November 3rd without producing any ID whatsoever by relying on this provision. Okay, so they just got to classify themselves as indefinitely confined. And when they did that, they didn't have to produce any photo ID. So think about that. You just get to put yourself in a bucket. You don't have to provide any verification or any photo ID at all. And as this goes on, we're going to see a specific example here from this individual named Scott Donnell. So on March 25th, the clerk of Dane County, Scott McDonnell, publicly told Dane County voters and others throughout the state to declare themselves indefinitely confined under the Wisconsin statute. And he told them to do that so they could avoid having to provide proof that they are eligible voters. And this is his Facebook post. All right, so this is what he's talking about specifically. He issued the following statement on Facebook. And this is the quote that's in the lawsuit itself. It says, "I have informed Dane County municipal clerks I am declaring all Dane County voters may indicate as needed they are indefinitely confined due to illness. I urge all voters who request a ballot and have trouble presenting a valid ID to indicate that they are indefinitely confined." And he gives them instructions. He says, go over to myvote.wisconsin.gov. You can select, I certify that I'm indefinitely confined due to age, illness, and infirmity. And then all you have to do is you just skip the step of uploading your ID in order to receive a ballot for the April 7th election. So this is during the primaries. And he goes on and he says, voters are confined due to the COVID-19 illness. So he posted that on Facebook. This is the Dane County municipal clerk saying, I am declaring this, providing them with the link, sending them to a website, saying, just go on here, fill out the form, just skip your voter ID. Don't even need it. Don't even need it. All you got to do is just fill out the form. You're good to go. Lawsuit goes on, says he was reprimanded by the Wisconsin Supreme Court for his encouragement to the voters to avoid the law specifically. But, even though he was reprimanded, the Wisconsin Elections Commission never retracted its erroneous guidance. No one would even question their use of indefinitely confined to avoid the photo identification. It's not even a question. On March 25th, They also emailed all of the clerks responsible for the administering the elections, told them to do the same thing, and a similar notice was given out of the Milwaukee County Clerk. So in total, in 2019, 72,000 people voted this way. They were indefinitely confined. But in November 2020, we have 243,900. So it effectively overturned Wisconsin's voter identification law. Absolutely was promoted by the government itself. Just go onto our website. We're telling you that you're indefinitely confined. Just skip that question. You're going to get a ballot. Very, very frustrating. The Wisconsin Legislature goes into their policy and they say here, it is the express policy of the state that voting is a constitutional right. In contrast, voting by absentee ballot is a privilege because it's exercised wholly outside the traditional safeguards of the polling place. The privilege of voting by absentee must be carefully regulated. That is all in the statute. It's all part of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin legislature decided that this was important. They passed it into law, and the people running the elections did something different. They said, you don't need to do this stuff. Just put yourself in that bucket. You're going to be fine. So this lawsuit goes on, and it references parts of the Department of Justice manual talking about how bad voter fraud is. We see that here. The federal prosecution of election offenses says here that there was a lot of concern perpetrated through mail-in ballots. So the DOJ right now is talking about how this stuff is not a big deal. They can't find any evidence of this. Well, in 2017, they had a manual. So there was a lot of problems with this stuff. Absentee ballots are particularly susceptible to fraudulent abuse, is what they say specifically. So I'm not real sure why they're not finding it this go round, but it's in their manual. It was there at some point. Drop my clicker. It says that any alternate absentee ballot shall be satisfied or shall be staffed by the municipal clerk. So here we have another statute saying that the drop-off boxes are not appropriate. You need to have somebody there in person picking up the ballots. They're not adequately staffed if you just drop them off at the side of a corner. It goes on. It says that anything that came in Wisconsin that was outside of the ordinary may not be counted. Okay, more statutes here, more Wisconsin statutes. Illegal drop boxes were put out in place on November 16th, 2.5 weeks before the election. One was placed in a large public park. So even though the Wisconsin statute says these things have to be staffed and manned, we're not going to do it here. We're just going to put them in the, on the corners in violation of the law. We have 5 mayors who had a plan in place to encourage absentee voting, even though the legislature said, no, can't do that. This is a privilege, not a right. They were encouraging and anticipating in their mayor's voting plan that 80% of the residents will vote by mail. We have in Wisconsin, again, the mayor's voting program nearly. So if this is an interesting fact, yeah. Where did this money come from? How did they get the funding to implement all of these changes? Well, they went to a group called the CTCL, which is the Center for Tech and Civic Life, right? And that's a private organization. Their donations nearly equaled the total of $7.2 million that the federal government gave them through the CARES Act. So the CTCL gave in Wisconsin $6.3 million over to the government, the 5 largest cities for the mayor's voting program, and it was almost the exact equal as $7.2 million, which came from the federal government. $4.1 million went to the local elections for fall 2020 amongst the COVID. Now, CTCL, it says that it's concerned with. Okay, so the allegation here is that CTCL is actually helping to undermine, not uphold state law. And so I look into CTCL. Well, who is behind that? Where did all this money come from? Where does $6.3 million from some interesting fund come from? Well, it comes from Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg. Center for Tech and Civic Life, on their website, they have this notification here that Mark Zuckerberg donated $250 million to CTCL, which was a re-grant to local election jurisdictions across the country to help ensure that they have staffing, training, and equipment necessary so that this November every eligible voter can participate. So that's where this money's going. $250 million goes to literally from Facebook to go and help run the election. It's to literally help to run the election from the CTCL. All right, where'd that money go? Well, here's what we have. The partisan correlation of funding under the Safe Voting Plan in Wisconsin is summarized in the following table. It went to all these different jurisdictions that all had a lot of blue votes in them. Not so much the other areas. Only the ones that are going to help. So just take a look at those numbers. And you can kind of see the pattern there, right? The lawsuit continues. It says, we go on October 19th, the Wisconsin Legislature issued guidances for spoiling the ballots and told election officials that witnesses do not need to appear to add a missing address. They do not need to do anything to complete the ballot, essentially. And so here, the official guidance from Wisconsin election commissions said, yeah, just fix it. You don't need to appear to add a missing address. It says you can complete addresses for witnesses and you can count ballots with incomplete witness certifications contrary to the state law. So this would result in an unknown number of unlawful votes being counted from absentee ballots submitted without photo identification and without compliance. Right? So again, the Wisconsin Elections Commissions, the people who run the election, are making these claims. Here's a list of more affidavits. Seen a lot of affidavits on this program. Affidavit of Beth Brown, who says she was a Milwaukee poll watcher who was prevented from observing. 38, Bartholomew Williams. Observed ballot counters refusing to announce the name. It goes on and on and on. I don't need to read all of them, right? It's a lot here. The next question is, well, what are they asking for? What do they want out of this lawsuit? We're going to get over to Rudy Giuliani in Michigan in a minute. But here's what they're asking for specifically. They want that the defendants, they want a statement that they violated the Electors Clause by failing to abide by the directions of the Wisconsin Legislature. They want a notice that they violated equal protection and due process. And ultimately, they want to say that 50,000 ballots were tainted, a number well in excess of the current difference between the two votes. And then they're going to ask that the court impose any other remedy if possible, including attorney's fees, anything else that is just and proper, an injunction that is consistent with the decision, and so on. So we go back to the same question. The executive branch, the people who run the elections, the electors, the commission on elections, the different county clerks, city clerks, they're the ones responsible for following the rules that the legislature passes. The legislature is the body of government that is most closely connected to the people. They specifically in their laws, in the statutes that I just showed you on the slides, said only indefinite exceptions for those who are indefinitely confined if it's actual, if that's an accurate statement, not if you just decide that you have some concerns about COVID and you want to mail your ballot in. That's not what the absentee ballot provision was for in Wisconsin. But the election officials, they manipulated the rules. They said, well, it's COVID. Everything's an emergency in COVID. We've seen this around the country a number of different times from a lot of different lawyers in different states where they're making the claim COVID required massive changes in the laws. And in Wisconsin, they didn't really go and file lawsuits or change the laws. They just had the election commission do it. Just put in their guidance. Do this instead of that. Then you have the ability for literally anybody to go on the website, get a ballot without having to upload ID or send ID in because there's an exception that they are exploiting. If that's not, you could rig an election just on that alone. You don't need Dominion. You don't need anything other than that. It's probably pretty easy to rig an election in that capacity. Just think about it. What if you have, it'd be very easy to do. All you need to do is get a list of voters, list it anywhere you want. Say you get 200,000 voters. You get them from a list. You get text messages all the time from these individuals who are sending you texts about voting for somebody. Private companies, they have lists. You get one of those lists. Corroborate the data, throw out half the list, say you get 200,000 votes, you disqualify half of those people. You got 100,000 voters left. Now you take that list, you clean it up, you find the people who've already voted, or you send them a text message, have you already voted? If they say yeah, kick those out. Find the people who don't respond, the people who unsubscribe, you don't want to use them. So you whittle that list down from 200,000 down to 100,000 people. You got a good list of people who you kind of think are dead voters, or not actually dead, but just sort of gone. You know, they're still alive so they can cast a ballot, but they're just not super active in politics anymore. So you have this list. Maybe you whittle it down, like I said, even further. You get, 50,000 people. You have a quarter of the list. Now you just run those names into that program. The government just gave you a website. Go plug some names in there. Register them as absentee ballot recipients who want an absentee ballot. They don't need to upload any ID because they just have to check that box that says I'm indefinitely confined. Okay, you farm that out to some click farm overseas. Anybody would do that for you. You could find easily dozens of virtual assistants or a different agency across the country to just run the names in. Everything gets submitted. That 50,000, say you only get 20,000 of those to go through. All right, well, you get 200 different addresses, P.O. boxes, or whatever you want. 200 different addresses. You only need about 20,000 votes. Okay, 200. That's about 100 addresses that would have 200 votes going to them. All right, so pretty easy. I think you could do that no problem. And that's it. It's legitimate. They actually mail you a ballot. That's a real ballot that's connected to a voter. If that voter goes to the election and votes in person, they just say, well, we already mailed you a ballot. And they say, oh, that's weird. I never got it. They say, yeah, COVID, everything's kind of messed up. Yeah, we don't really know what was happening with the ballots. So sorry, here's another one. Here's a provisional. Go vote. You don't get caught. The whole thing is easy. The government enabled it. And then they told people to go use it that way. So you can see how this kind of changes the game a little bit. This is government malfeasance, literally encouraging people and providing them insight on how to rig an election. Pretty easy to do. What I just described doing, not complicated. I think anybody can do that. Think about anybody who does mass mailing, who does the mass mailers, who can print a lot of things, who can, utilize a lot of individuals who are workhorses in different, click farms around the world. Could easily do that. Not even a question. So that's the lawsuit. They're changing it a little bit. They're going after the people who ran the election, and they're saying you were malicious. You were willful in violating the sanctity of this election. The legislature told you what to do and how to do it. You people came in and did it however you wanted to do it. And that is a constitutional problem. That's why I think the Supreme Court will like this argument. We're talking about equal protection. We're talking about due process. This is the type of issue that I think Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett are all going to really enjoy. So we'll continue to follow this one along. This is different than some of the other election stuff that's going on in Wisconsin. You already saw in Wisconsin today that the Supreme Court there had indicated that they're going to be rejecting one of Trump, some attorney, some lawyer there. I don't know specifically which lawsuit. There are so many of them right now, but it was rejected. It's not this lawsuit. We're not talking about this one. That was a different lawsuit. The team, whoever filed it, wanted to appeal directly to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Wisconsin Supreme Court said, nope, can't come to us directly. Got to go through the lower level courts. And so they did that. And so this is different. Again, there are a lot of lawsuits flying all over the place, but this one is interesting. It's a little bit different. The arguments are a little bit, I would say, more finely tuned in a way that is persuasive for higher level courts that we're not seeing in some of the other courts. I've been a little bit skeptical about Sidney Powell and the Dominion claims and this idea that there's this huge grand conspiracy all over the world. Like I said, I'm not sure what the court would do with that or what the remedy would be for that type of a complaint. What are they supposed to do throughout the entire election? The court will never do that. Never do that. So the allegation that Dominion is, so infested in our electoral system, Supreme Court may say that's true, or we're not going to throw out the entire election. They're just not going to do that. It would destabilize the entire legal system, in my opinion. So I just don't think that they would ever do something like that. But a case like this, they have a remedy for. They can go back to Wisconsin and say, listen, yeah, you guys totally botched that. Anybody who submitted a ballot that was an indefinitely defined person because you just on your own decided to change the rules on the fly in the middle of an election, any one of those ballots shouldn't count. I think that's a pretty reasonable remedy here. They encouraged people, the government encouraged people to go do this thing, and they did it. We saw the numbers. It was in 2019, like 70,000. In 2020, 270,000. Everybody was using it. Don't you think that opens it up for fraud? I mean, how could it not? How could somebody who shouldn't have voted not go on there and just say, there's no problem, It's mind-blowing to me. But apparently this is not enough evidence. for many people. All right, let's go on to Rudy Giuliani yesterday was in Michigan. They had a hearing, which we've got some interesting clips from. I know he had another hearing today in Georgia. So what I wanted to be doing on these types of highlight reel type things is to highlight people who are different than we heard from before. A lot of the witnesses have been the same people, but we have some new interesting details from some other people who were at the hearing yesterday. So let's listen in and see what this woman has to say.
Yes.
Would you say that about 100,000 false documents were created?
Yeah, from September 22nd till, I would say, till September 30th. Yeah, about 10 days. I mean, I was there till October 2nd.
And you estimated, when we went over this, about 10,000 a day.
Yeah, anywhere between 10,000 to 15,000. Yeah, sometimes we will be able to complete. I even remember 14,000 packages. Sometimes it's 12,000. So you can just, to be on the safe side, you can say 10,000 per day. That's a good number.
And just before we leave this, would your supervisor say this to all of you publicly? In other words, he would say, today, the date we're going to use is
this date.
Whatever.
Yes. Yeah, that's the announcement.
In other words, you had the phony date of the day.
Yeah, that's the announcement they will make. Yes. On the floor, yes.
Phony date of the day. That's a good line. You know, that's the type of stuff that people will latch onto. Phony date of the day. This woman is saying that there are literally thousands and thousands of ballots that were backdated, right? And you can listen to her testimony. You can probably do a lot of background check on her. You know, this is not the hysterical, white racist redneck out there that the media is trying to caricaturize these people as. It's ridiculous. You know, this is a real person. This is a real woman who's probably petrified to be coming forward and having to talk about this stuff. And she's telling you that there are literally tens of thousands of ballots that have been backdated. And, that's not evidence. And apparently nobody wants to look into it. It's ridiculous. So she goes on. She's got another statement. Let's get to that. Here she is again. She's talking about moving ballots around.
The first thing I will do is I will enter the voter and I will do a voter search. Then the system will tell you whether city already mailed the absentee ballot to them or not. Whether there is an active ballot in the QEF system for that voter. So when you do that, lots of time you will see a ballot has been already sent to that voter. But when they come to you, they said, I never requested a ballot. I never received any ballot. I never requested for a ballot. Can I vote now? I'm here. I want to vote now. I said, of course. I mean, I can spoil the ballot. Then I can issue another ballot and you can vote. So I have done that many times. But I was instructed to do like that. The first thing I will.
All right. So, once again, this is one of those situations where what you see here, I think, is pretty compelling. Now, if this were to take place in a court of law, if this woman came in, shared her testimony, I think a judge would listen to that. And this is the opportunity for the people who say that there is no evidence to cross-examine these witnesses. If this happens in a court of law, the opposing party can come back into court. They can beat her up over her questions. They can literally ask her essentially whatever they want, as long as it's within the scope of the original questioning. And they can call her credibility into play. They can challenge her in a court of law. We have not seen that yet. We have 40-something lawsuits that everybody's very excited about that they're getting dismissed, but we haven't seen any of this actual evidence presented. That's why the Giuliani team is going around the country and just bypassing the courts, making the case directly to the legislature, which, as we just heard about in the Wisconsin lawsuit, is the best mechanism that is closest related to the people. It's where democracy happens most. The other positions, not so much. This lady is saying exactly what we were just talking about in my hypothetical in Wisconsin, that people could have been voting for other people through this absentee process. When people show up to vote, they find a ballot's already been cast in their name, and they're wondering what the heck happened. She says, well, I don't know. I can spoil that other one for you, give you a new one. So maybe that one vote won't be a duplicate count, but all of the other ones that were mailed in that didn't have a person showing up on voting day, those were getting counted. And who was responsible for sending those ballots in? Well, we don't know, because in many instances, there was no signature requirement or verification, and you could even upload and request your ballot on the Wisconsin website. So it's the same themes. Don't you see the pattern that is going on in all of these different lawsuits? It's the same stories, the same themes. They need to breach the verification component, whatever that looks like. If that's uploading an ID in Wisconsin, if that's signing a document in Georgia, they're trying to manipulate their way out of that verification process. And this lady is saying exactly what you would expect to happen. If they're sending ballots in on behalf of somebody else, that person shows up to vote, they're told, you already voted. They say, no, I didn't. They give them a new ballot. Not a problem. Nobody's going to know that. Probably happened 1,000 times, 10,000 times that day. It's not unusual. You would expect that to happen. Except when the IDs are not included and there's no signature verifications. Very frustrating. So that was it for this woman. We have another woman here who has been really making the waves on the internet due to her testimony. Now, there's some people saying that she's drunk. I didn't see that personally. I've dealt with a lot of that in my life, so I can usually spot those people pretty well. She does kind of sound like she's, slurring her words a little bit, but I don't know that that's alcohol related. I mean, people sometimes talk like that. People can have a little bit of marbles in your mouth, as it were. You kind of I can catch myself talking like that all the time. So you just keep that in mind. And this woman is nervous, and she's in front of a bunch of people, and she's I didn't clip a different segment out, but there's a bit here where she talks about the threats and harassment and everything that she's been receiving. So, this is a high pressure, high stakes environment. Remember, most people are not the best public speakers in the world. It's, I think, the biggest public fear in the world. People would rather, essentially they're less afraid of death than they are about public speaking. So, cut lay people a little bit of slack. Now, she kind of invited some of the criticism because she had some sass to her, no question about it. And it's kind of hilarious because she gives it right back to these Congress people. And so when you watch this clip, you can be judgmental about it. When I watched it, I wasn't trying to dunk on her like a lot of people were around the internet. But, I sense somebody who's pretty frustrated. And I think how she's expressing herself is very in alignment with how a lot of Americans are feeling around the country. Very frustrated. They're tired of these questions from these idiot politicians who are just not doing anything. They're just fed up with it. And so she gives some sass back to the guy, and you can split hairs on that. I wouldn't die on this hill either one way or the other. I just think that it is kind of interesting that the people now are pushing back on the government. And anytime that happens, you're going to get a high five from me on that. Not anytime, most of the time. But this is this woman here during the Michigan hearings last night.
I have 19 things in my affidavit. I was at the TCF Center for 27 hours. I'm a mother. I have 2 children, and I have 2 degrees. I'm very, I would never, I don't know any woman in the world that would write an affidavit under oath just to write it. You can go to prison for this. So anyways, I want to make this very clear. I was initially supposed to work at the Detroit Department of Elections building. That was an order by my manager, Nick Economagounis, part owner of Dominion. I have it all in emails. I was trained on the adjudication and tabulation process. So in the email, it says you are to park in a parking lot and get shuttled over to this, they referred to it as the Chicago warehouse. I know for a fact there was illegal activity going on there. People have pictures of people carrying ballots out of that place. There is pictures of vans full of ballots coming out of that place.
So she didn't sound too bad there to me. Sounded pretty reasonable there. And the allegation here is interesting because the idea that people are moving ballots around by itself is not so much a crime or evidence of fraud. But if you're moving in out of vans and it's sort of outside of the ordinary procedure of things, remember what we're talking about are ballots. It's like as valuable as a dollar bill, probably $1,000 bill. I mean, every one of those ballots is very, very valuable. And so with anything that you have that's valuable, whether it's a blood result in a DUI case that's being transported after somebody, had their blood drawn, you want to track that evidence. It's evidence. It's material. You want a proper, verified, vetted chain of custody. So the person who's transferring it, it shouldn't be in a suitcase or some luggage like we saw in a different hearing today, I think out of Georgia. It shouldn't be some guy with a U-Haul van moving stuff around at 4 a.m. behind a tabulation center in a way that she is recognizing is not legitimate. That's the problem, that there's all of these security breaches from point A to point B to point C. Somebody's violating the standard protocol for how this stuff gets transferred and implemented. And chain of custody is a big issue. It's a big legal issue. You can win legal cases by breaking the chain of custody. In other words, somebody can be charged with a crime. And if you break the chain of custody, you say, okay, well, yeah, I mean, the gun went from this person to this person to this person. You don't know where that middle person is. Therefore, they can't verify where this thing came from, who tampered it, who did something with it, any of those things. Therefore, you can't implicate our client because our client may have had it at point A, but something happened at point B. And so now when you have it and you're using it as evidence against us in point C, we don't know what point B was. So that doesn't count anymore. And you can win cases like that. Here, they're trying to supposedly say that there were no chain of custody problems, and all of these, again, this pattern, this repeat from different witnesses in different states, in different locations, all saying that these ballots showed up just randomly in the middle of the night. Isn't that weird? Somebody just pulled up with a Ferrari and just carted out a bunch of ballots. What the heck is that? And here's just another one in Wisconsin. She's testifying about it. So another one. There's a lot. Yeah, she goes on. Now this one, I think we got 2 more clips from her. One of them is fun. Let's see if it's this one.
Running batches of ballots through the tabulators.
This is not the fun one.
Countless times without discarding them first. The tabulating machines would jam 2 to 3 times an hour. When they would jam, the correct process would be to pull out the problem ballot that jammed. Say the problem ballot was number 24 out of 50. I wasn't allowed to touch any hardware at all. I would assist them, tell them to pull out this ballot, put the problem ballot on top. In Michigan, our ballots from the tabulators don't just drop into steel ballot boxes. They are now, as they got tabulated, they are now on top of the tabulating machine. Okay? So instead of them taking these, so say, let's keep it number 25 is the problem ballot, it got jammed. So the computer would throw an error. It would say ballot number 25, there's an error. I would say pull out ballot number 25, slowly pull it out, put it on top, take the ballots that had already been tabulated, which are on top of the tabulating machine now, put them all back in a stack, discard the entire batch, and re-scan it. Instead of discarding, they were just rescanning, counting ballots 9 to 10 times, counting votes 9 to 10 times.
So they were counting the same ballot, the same vote, 9 or 10 times?
Yes, sir.
So how many ballots would you estimate in front of you that you observed were counted multiple times in the machine? Can you put a number to it, an estimated number?
At least 30,000.
At least 30,000. Okay. Thank you.
At least 30,000. That is a lot of ballots. Now, again, this is, in this hearing, she's not cross-examined. Nobody's really challenging her on that. That's not true. Some of the senators were asking her about it, or some of the state representatives in the legislature were asking her about it. And we're going to get into that next. She gets a little bit sassy back with them, and I think it was just great. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind, this is a little bit more friendly than it would be in a court environment. If she were in front of a judge and the opposing party was cross-examining her, they could probably do a pretty good job at wrecking that 30,000 number. I think anybody who's a halfway competent attorney could probably do that. And you just want to, ask her to explain it essentially. What was she responsible for? What did she see? Where was she? And really break down where she calculated that 30,000 number, because most people are pretty bad with numbers. And if you ask somebody to ballpark something, they're usually way off. So, you can take that with a grain of salt. But the point is the underlying allegation that there was a process when there was a jam. You take the ballots, you do something else with them. That wasn't being followed. They took the ballots, they rescanned them in. Jammed again, take those ballots out, scan them in again. And what happened with that? What happened with those votes? Were those votes, deleted? Were they duplicated? Because remember, these are secret ballots. There's no name on them. Once they get past a certain point, they get into the system and you can do whatever you want with them. It's not connected to you, because the thing that connects it to you is the envelope. It's the secret envelope that you sign that connects you and your ballot. Once it's outside of the envelope, it's free range. You can kind of do whatever you want with that. Now, we get into a little bit of a section here where another senator there, somebody who is a part of this legislative hearing, goes in and starts asking her some questions. She doesn't like it so much, and so she gives him a little bit of a needle back, and that's always fun to watch. So let's take a look at what she has to say.
That's not the case.
What did you guys do? Take it and do something crazy to it?
I'm just saying the numbers are not off by 30,000 votes. So
I know what I
saying
saw.
That they're filling in.
I know what I saw, and I signed something saying that if I'm wrong, I can go to prison.
Okay.
Did you?
Okay,
I'm just trying to.
Did you? Did you see her face? If you watch that again, her face. Did you? Oh, she knows. She knows. She just let it slide, and that's hilarious to me for some reason. All right, now is she going to go to prison for violating, for a perjury problem on an affidavit that's, at a very low level or sort of entry level terms of litigation? Probably not, but it is hysterical nonetheless. All right, so that's what happened in Michigan yesterday. Overall, I think effective. I think these are effective. I think these are helping people to understand that there are just mounds of evidence. Largely what we've seen from the mainstream source is just a whitewash on this stuff. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to cover it. And every time that they just keep saying there's nothing there, and the Trump team comes out and shows that there's more there, and they're flying around to every one of these different states, in Michigan, in Georgia, they were just in Arizona, they're bouncing all over the place. It's going to start compounding. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the claims, I think, are getting better and better. Now they're making specific claims against literal individuals who are a part of the different governments, who are responsible for how badly the elections were run. And their actions, their activity was willful. This wasn't a mistake. This was people knowing what the law is, responsible for running the elections, and then changing the rules on the fly. Supreme Court's not going to be too happy about that. All right, so the last part before we jump into the live chat is going to be Arizona. What's going on in Arizona? We have Dr. Kelli Ward. This is her. She is the chairwoman of the Arizona GOP. She's a mom, military wife, family physician, former Arizona state senator, and she ran for Senate here at one point. I think she was actually running against John McCain. It was, if I recall, it was a little bit of a heated primary, but it wasn't ultimately close. John McCain is, I think it was John McCain, kind of an icon here in Arizona. And so I think he won handedly. It may have been a different senator. I don't remember. Anyways, this woman is big in Arizona Republican politics. And so let's hear what she had to say. Now, in Arizona, there are a number of lawsuits that are taking place in our Superior Court. I do believe Ms. Powell filed another one in our district court. She did. I have actually clipped that out. I forgot I even read that one. So I have a couple clips from that as well. So let's talk Arizona real quickly. So this is what Miss Ward has to say. She is the chairperson of the Arizona GOP. She filed a lawsuit basically asking what they're going for right now is an audit. And she's going to detail a very, very small audit that the court authorized. We're talking about only 100 ballots. And so you say, well, that's nothing. That's true. But that's enough to get a bigger audit. So they're going to be asking for, instead of the original 100, now they're going to be asking for 2,500. And if the numbers match the same thing that we saw in the 100 ballot audit, maybe after the 25, we get a full audit. And so you see how this stuff works. It's very incremental. People want a lawsuit to be filed and Donald Trump to just walk out with the election victory in hand. That's not how it works. It's very incremental. The courts are not going to be inclined to just give full unfettered access to everything. And so here, what Ms. Ward is talking about is just the first step. So let's see what she had to share with us. I don't think this was today or yesterday. I think this was a couple days ago. But then we have a new order, a new motion from her legal team, which we're going to talk about next. So this is Ms. Kelli Ward. Let's listen to what she has to say.
Good morning, Arizona. It is that time for an update from the Republican Party of Arizona. I'm your chairwoman, Dr. Kelli Ward, and wow, explosive news in our lawsuit. So remember yesterday I talked about that we filed a petition to be able to examine ballots. We got to examine some duplicate ballots, and to remind you what a duplicate ballot is, it's when there's a damaged ballot or for some reason the machine cannot read a ballot. So then election workers recreate that ballot. They duplicate it for the voter, and it's either fed back into the machine or created electronically. So these duplicate ballots, we got to examine 100 of them. It's a very, very small sample, but guess what? We found 2 ballots that were changed. One was changed from Trump to Biden. One was just taken away from Trump for no reason that we can find an explanation for. So 2% of those ballots. Now, thank goodness that Judge Warner said he wanted to err on the side of transparency and let us look at these. Also, this is good news because those media propagandists who say there's no evidence of fraud can now shut up. The bad news is this looks like this election has been attempted to be stolen from President Trump. Now, back to the transparency. The judge said he wanted to err on the side of transparency, but the attorneys for Katie Hobbs that has said Trump supporters are neo-Nazis, remember, and the Biden electors, they called a special emergency hearing with the judge to say, wait, those duplicate ballots that are examined need to be examined only by our attorneys, and it needs to be privileged, it needs to be kept secret from the public. Now, the judge did say, why would you want that? And then he refused their request, their ridiculous request. This shows us that these Democrats are anti-transparency. They are potentially covering up fraud. I can tell you something. I, Kelli Ward, we the Republican Party, and we the American Patriots will not stop looking until all of this is brought to light. We are going to keep Arizona great, and we're going to keep America great. See you tomorrow.
Not too bad there, Miss Dr. Kelli Ward. Pretty good. You know, this is one of those, this is exactly what we're asking for here. Some transparency. That's all. Some accountability. That's all. And her point there about the opposing party wanting to make sure that all of the observers and all of the different people who are going to be watching this audit kind of get thrown out of the courtroom. That's what they wanted. Now, she said the judge also agreed. Transparency. That's all we're asking for. That's it. If there's transparency, we go in and we find it was a clean election, run fairly and evenly, and there's no fraud or limited fraud that doesn't change the course. Great. We're done with this conversation. We can move past it. But maybe we're not going to find that, which is why they're putting up such a difficult fight. And again, this is the government, okay? This is not a private actor. This is not somebody trying to barge in and steal the secret Coke recipe, right? Or what is the secret sauce that McDonald's puts on their Big Macs? Nobody wants those trade secrets. Nobody wants the guts of an iPhone or the source code of that of an Android or whatever it is. It's not super protected data like you would expect in some other security environments. This is the government. These are the people that we elect to run our system. And if we want access to how they ran the damn election, shouldn't we get access to that? Shouldn't we be able to go in there and just see it? What did you do? How did you do it? I was reading another thread, I think it was on Twitter somewhere, of a security researcher who was explaining that they used to work at a bank. They were a computer software company that would sell software to banks so that they could manage their money and do whatever they needed to do. And the story here was, and this makes sense to me, was that any time that they were entering into a contract with a bank, with a credit union, or whomever it was, they would the bank itself would literally go out and hire an external third party, or they had somebody on staff if the bank is big enough, and they would sit next to the software seller who's wanting to sell this piece of software, and they would go through the code line by line, literally. What does this do? Yep, that's what it does. What does this do? That's what that does. And they would address every single line. And you'd expect the same thing should happen here, right? If we want to go and see what Dominion did, why couldn't we go see it? Well, because it's security and all this stuff. Well, we're already making the claim that it's not secure, and there's enough evidence around there to support it, or at least make a good argument in court and let the courts decide. But if we want access to that stuff, it's we're the people. We entered into a contract with these private companies. Now they want to keep us out from viewing any of it. It's ridiculous. Ms. Ward is absolutely correct here. So let's take a look at the actual lawsuit. This is what we see. She is suing a number of different people down here, and this is not the actual lawsuit. This is a different motion, a motion to compel, and a motion for continued inspection. So this comes from a local Arizona firm. Here's what they're saying. On Tuesday, December 1st, so 2 days ago, representatives, this is what happened with the audit, representatives of the plaintiffs, so that's the people filing the lawsuit, Ms. Ward, the defendants, the people who are a part of the government, and Hobbs attended an inspection of the ballots at Maricopa County. This was an inspection of so-called duplicate ballots, began around 4:30 p.m. shortly after the hearing. And it was funny that this attorney noted here, shortly after the court hearing on the defendant's request to exclude credentialed observers. So, hey, kind of throwing that there in parentheses. Oh, yeah, it started at 4:30, right around the time when you guys just lost that hearing to throw our observers out of the room. After you lost that, that's when it started. So that's kind of an unnecessary sentence, but it's a nice little needle in the back. It says, the inspection concluded around 6 p.m. with one credentialed observer and undersigned counsel present and observing the review of duplicate ballots on behalf of the plaintiff. Right. So Counsel Gonski and so on and so others were there for the defendants and for the intervener Hobbs. Of the 100 duplicate ballots that were inspected, compared to their originals, a ballot was identified where the original was clearly a vote for Trump and the duplicate ballot switched the vote to Biden. So here they're comparing two votes, right? One was obviously for Trump. Somebody redid a duplicate and it was for Biden. So that's a 1. A second ballot was also identified on which the original ballot was clearly a vote only for Trump, but the duplicate ballot had a vote for both Trump and a blank write-in candidate, which would cause the Trump vote to be canceled because it was an overvote. There were no errors observed in the sample which granted a vote to Trump or which canceled out a vote for Biden. So really, this is kind of a 3-point swing, right? On the one hand, there was a vote for Donald that didn't count. It was that overvote. So that's a +1 for Donald. But the other vote was a switch. So it was taking one away from Joe Biden, which is kind of another point, and then giving it over to Donald Trump, which is kind of the third point. So of 100 ballots, we see a 3-point swing. Well, in Arizona, the race was only lost by Donald Trump by, I think, 0.3%, less than 1%. So this is clearly within the margin. If you could make this argument that sort of ratio would extrapolate across these other, duplicate ballots, you could have significantly more than that, presuming that the numbers in the buckets are big enough, which we don't know quite yet. Now, the other thing that was interesting is that they're making the argument in this lawsuit that the December 8th date, which is the safe harbor provision that's coming up very soon, or the December 14th date, which is another deadline you've been hearing a lot. That's when the states cast their votes and they send them over to Congress. They're saying those dates don't really even matter. We've seen this point before. When we were originally starting our analysis of these different cases, we were sort of using those as end dates. Maybe these lawsuits will stop around December 14th. That's not the case anymore. These lawsuits are going to continue. They're not holding off anytime soon. I think they're going to escalate and increase, in fact. And the deadline now that they're using is now January 6th. They're making the case that All of this stuff can continue to percolate from now until January 6th. Early next year. And remember, this is when in Congress they read the votes. So the states cast the votes, they all go into Congress, the Congress has to read them and declare them. And at that point in time, House representatives can come and challenge the votes. They can say, no, that we're not going to take those votes. There's a problem in that state. We object. They have to break for a certain period of time, have a conversation about that. They cannot exceed 2 hours. They got to go back in the room and then continue to count the votes. If nobody gets to 270, then you have a contingent election where all states get one vote. If that doesn't happen, if they can't come to an agreement and elect the next president, if January 20th comes about, the Presidential Succession Act kicks into play. If we don't have a new president, guess who we're looking at? Miss Nancy Pelosi, if I'm doing the math right on all that. So that is what we're looking at. Now, the January 6th date is that new deadline. This is where it's all coming out. And they talk about it here, the safe harbor doctrine. It says the so-called safe harbor doctrine date of December 8th is not serious enough to defeat further inquiry into the validity of the ballot. So this comes from Bush versus Gore, but this is a dissenting opinion. So in Bush versus Gore, they were making the case that they needed to decide this thing pretty quickly. Gore, I think, conceded on December 13th, but the majority in the opinion said, we got to decide this. The country's tearing itself apart over these ballots, these hanging chads in Florida. We can't allow that to continue on. We got to make a decision. I watched an interview from Judge Scalia, may he rest in peace, where he was explaining that they needed to decide. It was a major part of the decision process was this speed of the remedy. They needed a decision because the country needed a president. And in that opinion, the dissenting judges, so the judges who did not agree with the original underlying opinion, they said, we shouldn't have been rushed. December 14th, that's not that important. Justice Souter said, it's not serious enough to defeat further inquiry into the validity of the ballots. And so this attorney here is using that as a basis for this complaint. He says, if that date were to pass without a resolution, then Arizona would still be entitled to deliver the electoral votes to Congress, and Congress must count unless both houses find that the votes had not been regularly given. And that's what I'm talking about. If both houses find that, then they'll have that contingent election that I was talking about. He says further, in contrast to Bush versus Gore, neither Arizona legislature nor its courts have expressed a wish that Arizona must resolve judicial disputes regarding the selection of presidential electors prior to the safe harbor deadline. So the complaint goes on. Or this is a motion, not the complaint. It says that under ARS 1612 and so on and so forth, also while December 14th, it's the date under federal law to meet and give and transmit it. It's the fourth day in December, December 23rd, which they request the Secretary of State to send a certified return immediately. So you have all of these other sort of intermediary dates that are kind of irrelevant. It's all just procedural stuff. December 8th, safe harbor, so what? December 14th, that's when they got to meet and give their votes to the Congress, so what? December 23rd, so what? It finishes here. In other words, the only deadline of any practical significance is January 6th, which is when Congress actually meets to count the electoral votes. And even after that, there is the truly final constitutional deadline of January 20th for inauguration of the president per the 20th Amendment, right? And that's the date, 20th Amendment. If on January 20th we don't have a new president, then we have some additional provisions that will kick in. So that is what is happening with Ms. Ward's case. I know there were some additional hearings today. I think they were going on literally as I was doing show prep for this program, for this show. And so I'm going to take a look at all of that tonight, and we'll see what we have ready and able to go for tomorrow. One thing before we finish off here, I see a lot of super chats coming in, so I want to save some time for questions. One of the other lawsuits that was filed was in the United States District Court, so we'll wrap up here. This was Sidney Powell's lawsuit, so you can see here she's got a bar number from Texas, but she's filing a pro hoc vici application, which means she's asking to practice law in the District Court of Arizona. And it's her and a number of these individuals suing Doug Ducey in his official capacity and Katie Hobbs in her official capacity as the Secretary of State. So Doug Ducey is the governor here of Arizona. Her lawsuit is largely the same as what we've been kind of covering in some other lawsuits that she's been filing. Now, what Ms. Powell is doing is she's got some of the same underlying complaints that she's re-urging in different formats in different states. So think about it like a turkey sandwich, right? You want a turkey sandwich. Sometimes you want lettuce, tomato, mustard, mayo on there. Sometimes you want bacon and avocado on there. but you really want the turkey sandwich. Sometimes you dress it up a little bit. Sometimes you want some Dijon on there. Sometimes you want some regular mustard. But, it's the same turkey sandwich. It's kind of what her lawsuits look like. Same general skeleton. We all know what lawsuit we're getting, but some of the condiments are a little bit different. Some of the dressing is a little bit different, as it should be, because they're different claims in different states. In Arizona, you don't want to talk about Wisconsin law, and vice versa. You want to make it specific to Arizona and take the facts, remedy the facts, or match the facts with the state law and the issues that are going on in the state. So again, if you haven't seen a lot of other lawsuits from Sidney Powell, we spent a lot of time covering hers because there's a lot of meat in there that I think is worth visiting. So take a look at our other videos if you want a deeper dive on some of Ms. Powell's claims. But for Arizona purposes, here is what she is talking about specifically. She's adding all of these different unlawful votes up into different buckets. She says, this complaint presents expert witness testimony demonstrating that several 100,000 illegal, ineligible, duplicate, or purely fictitious votes must be thrown out. In particular, she identifies these 5 main buckets. A bucket of 219,000 votes, unreturned mail ballots, unlawfully ordered by third parties. Okay, so that's a big bucket. Returned ballots that were deemed unreturned by state, 86,000 there. She has votes by persons that moved out of state or subsequently registered to vote in another state for the 2020 election, 5,700 there. Excess votes to historically unprecedented and likely fraudulent turnout levels of 80% or more in over half of Maricopa and Pima County, another 100,000 votes. And then lastly, 62,000 votes that plaintiffs can show Mr. Biden received I can never say this word, statistically significant advantage from the use of the Dominion machines in a nationwide study, which conservatively gave him an additional, like I said, 62,000 votes. All said and done, she adds these up to 474,776 votes in Arizona that should not be counted, that are illegal, duplicate, ineligible, or even purely fictitious, according to Ms. Powell. And here's what she's asking for here in Arizona. This is the relief. This is the remedy that she wants. Is the remedy something that this court can do? We're going to see. For these reasons, they ask the court to enter a judgment in their favor, an order that directs Governor Ducey and Secretary Hobbs to decertify the election results, another order that prevents them from transmitting the currently certified Electoral College results, an immediate emergency order to seize and impound all the servers, software, voting machines, tabulators, printers, portable media, logs, ballot, and so on. Anything related to the November 3rd election. And we also have number 4, an order that no votes received or tabulated by the machines that were not certified as required by federal and state law be counted. So big asks there, decertification, stopping the transmission, seizing all of the evidence, and making sure that no votes were certified as required by federal law, or no votes were counted that were received on machines that were not certified by federal law. Those are some big asks. I'm not sure that the federal district court is going to be so inclined to do that, but we will see. There's a lot of complaint in her complaint, and it does mirror a lot of the same allegations that we're seeing around the country. So we'll see where those go. Now, Miss Faith over here has been sending me some information, and apparently somebody says, breaking news, Department of Justice announces lawsuit against Facebook. And so we have that pulled up. Let's take a look at what this is looking like. The DOJ sues Facebook alleging bias against U.S. workers in favor of temporary visa holders. Okay, so nothing particularly involved in the election, it looks like. The DOJ alleged that Facebook did not consider qualified and available U.S. workers for more than 2,600 positions with an average salary of $156,000, according to the release. The DOJ has sued Facebook, alleging it discriminated against U.S. workers by reserving positions for temporary visa holders. Facebook spokesperson says, the company has been cooperating with the DOJ in its review of this issue, and while we dispute the allegations in the complaint, we cannot comment further on pending litigation. So that is interesting. Not particularly election related, not Section 230 related, unfortunately, but this is something that happens a lot, right? These visas and things are really, really tricky. Tricky. These visas and things are really, really tricky. 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 and it's a hot button political issue, but I think it's probably outside the scope of this channel, so I will do my best not to comment on stuff that's sort of irrelevant. So, all right, let's jump back into some of the super chats. Had a lot coming in today. We have one from, let me turn that chat bot on, and Miss Faith, I just saw a super chat, so if you can throw me the link of that video of Carolina flying. He's asking about nope, that's not the one. He says there was another one, a video about fraud, video of the suitcases being pulled out in Georgia. I did see that a lot, so let's maybe pull that up, and then I will be able to play that for all of our friends here on the stream. All right, so starting back at the top, we have Becky Faye, who says, Rob, what do you know about the Safe Harbor Day? What does this mean to the situation for Trump's lawyers? So Safe Harbor, we kind of just covered that, but I don't think it means anything to them. They don't care. They're just going to move right on past it. They're going to move past Safe Harbor, which is on December 8th, past the Electors Day, which is on December 14th. They're really, I think, going to put all their eggs in one basket, which is going to be on January 6th. So we're not even close. I mean, think about that. We're about halftime right now. It's been a month out, and really, according to Trump's legal team, and really, according to the Constitution and all of the laws, it's January 6th is the day. That's what they're going to keep fighting towards. So they've got another 30 plus days to keep grinding this out. And if they keep this pace up every single day, having new hearings and new lawsuits and new filings and new witnesses, there's momentum here. The other side doesn't want to admit it, but there is momentum here. And their defense to all of this is, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. Our attorneys are going to file a bunch of motions, and we're going to prevent you from getting access to certain things. We're going to fight you every step of the way. We don't want you to see what actually happened. And the American people, that is going to be in my opinion, that is going to be the biggest, most damning component of this entire thing. Less so than the evidence itself, less so than the allegations. The cover-up is almost worse than some of the information that we're getting. Now, stealing an election, of course, is awful, but the cover-up is what is poking the tiger. People are so sick of it. They can feel it. They can feel that they're being lied to and that this stuff is not as it seems, and they're getting awakened, and they want more information. And the government and the rest of the people on the other side of the aisle, who are the sort of bury the heads in the sand and let this thing blow over crowd, it's going to backfire. It's going to come back to bite them in the butt. They should be out there doing the opposite of what Donald Trump and his team are doing. They should be out there having witnesses, affidavits, bringing out their own public relations campaign to show that this stuff was legitimate and lawful. But I'm not seeing much of that. I'm seeing a lot of articles that are just berating. We covered one of the articles here from, I think it was from CNN, where the only commentary that they had about Rudy Giuliani's one of his legislative hearings was that he was violating COVID protocols. That's the only comment they had. They said Rudy Giuliani was wherever he was, in Georgia or wherever. And they said, about 3 paragraphs in, we covered it here. I had a slide on it. 3 paragraphs all about COVID. Rudy Giuliani went to this hotel, even though one of his colleagues tested positive. We don't know if he's positive. He's interacting with all these high up. Okay, 5 paragraphs about COVID. When we're talking about electoral fraud, it's ridiculous. People can sense that. They can feel it, and they're tired of it, and I don't blame them. We have another one from Deborah Johnson. Help Sidney Powell recognize Dominion IP addresses go to Belgrade, Serbia, Venezuela, was Chavez CIA CFIUS construction. I think Sidney Powell probably has a pretty good idea about that at this point. We've seen even Rudy Giuliani present, what was his name? There's an old a retired colonel. God, I can never remember his name. We've seen him in a number of different legislative hearings where he's also indicating that there's very hard evidence that Dominion was communicating with external servers literally on election night, was his allegation. All right, let's take a look at some other questions. Did you follow up today's proceedings in Nevada? Latches came up. I would welcome your comments. That's from Sharon. So latches, yeah. I mean, latches, I think, is sort of a stretch of a concept, largely. We saw this with Senator Ted Cruz, who's been in front of the Supreme Court 9 times, won 5 of those lawsuits. He agrees that latches is sort of an excuse to put people in an impossible litigation position. So if you file a lawsuit before the election, then there's been no harm yet because the election hasn't happened. So you can't really file a lawsuit and say the Wisconsin Board of Electors really screwed this thing up. You can't sue them before the election happens because they haven't had a time to screw anything up. So you got to wait until after the election happens. Well, after the election happens, you file a lawsuit, the courts come back and say, nope, should have filed it sooner. Sorry. So you're dead both ways. It's a catch-22. You can't win. And so latches, I think, is just a total stretch. And I don't think the Supreme Court is going to look kindly on that. I think if the Supreme Court does anything, they're going to slap down the Pennsylvania Supreme Court for acting in a non-supreme manner. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says mathematics comes from the Greek for student disciple. So Jesus had 12 mathematicians. Someone admitted live on a show to Cali voter fraud. Yeah, I'm sure there's many instances of that. Thanks, Wolfgang. Thanks for the support. Thanks for always being here and for the super chats. We have Chris Kelly says, hey, Rob, I'm a fan from Brighton, England here. Can I get a shout out for my beautiful wife, Claire, my best mate and soulmate? Mega shout out, Claire. You have done a magnificent job by finding such a astounding husband. Chris is awesome. Claire, you're both awesome. The CNC crew, kind of like the R&R Law Group, kind of a cool thing going on there. Thank you both for being a part of the program. Thanks for your support, and thanks for the super chat. Hope you both do well this fine evening. We have Isaac Garcia, who says, comments on the Trump's team attorney. He didn't give a strong look to their legal argument. I'm not a lawyer, but most people in the comments were getting annoyed. Comments on the Trump's team attorney. So Trump's team, his attorneys thus far that we have seen have been Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, who I have not seen much courtroom activity for. So I'm not sure what litigation you're talking about. In Arizona, we had some live litigation that was being recorded today. I didn't get a chance to watch it because I was prepping for this show. So, but I don't think it was any one of Trump's specific lawyers. So keep this in mind. There are so many Trump lawyers, and they're not all really Trump's lawyers. So you have Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, who are sort of officially part of his team. You have Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood that the Trump officially has disavowed themselves from. You have these other individuals who are filing lawsuits sort of on behalf of Trump, but they haven't been publicly included in this public relations team that you see with Rudy and Jenna. So I'm not really sure which ones you're talking about. Some are certainly better than others. We've seen a lot of interesting and not so good lawsuits filed on behalf of Trump, but not necessarily from his legal team. And some of this new stuff that we're seeing from, we saw the Nevada lawsuit. I can't remember the woman's name right now. Weir, I think it is, W-E-I-R, out of Nevada. I like that lawsuit. I thought that was well put together, well written. She's got some fire behind there, and she's given it to this other side. I love that. We also have this new one that we just covered in Wisconsin. Also pretty good. These are interesting issues that I think that the Supreme Court would like to chime in on. The Dominion stuff, I don't think so much is going to, tickle their fancy so much, but the separation of powers, this originalism, this idea that one branch of government is encroaching on the other branch, this is basically all we talk about in constitutional law. I mean, a full year of studying this stuff. This is what the courts like to get involved in, not some of the more abstract, esoteric stuff. So we have Isaac Garcia, who says, in Nevada, I meant. So I'm not sure what that's referencing, but thanks for the super chat, Isaac. So you may have been talking. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so they were in Nevada. That's the case that he's talking about. All right. So no, I did not hear that one today, specifically in Nevada. We covered Nevada. I think that was on Monday or Tuesday. We went through that lawsuit with Lisa, somebody Weir, W-E-I-R was her name. And I was impressed with her lawsuit. So if that's the lawsuit that you're talking about, I'm not sure if she was the one presenting the oral arguments or presenting any of the evidence, but I'm going to look into that. There was a lot of activity going on. We have Zulu in the house who says, hi, Faith. He always says hi to her. If the complaints are getting better, what do we make of the last month of garbage billed as kraken-esque truth bombs? No harm, no foul. So I would actually think that there is a little bit of harm in that. I think this was a little bit of a public relations miss from the Trump team. This idea that, first of all, Sidney Powell wasn't on the team was kind of bogus. We all knew that she was, and then she wasn't anymore. And I think from her perspective, the idea that there was this kraken, there was this smoking gun, there was this big red pill that we were going to all be served was a mistake, because it's kind of doesn't feel that way. Now, her allegations are very, very strong. She's saying that Dominion is responsible for this and that, and all these like really, really egregious allegations, but the evidence hasn't kind of backed that up. It's been a lot of speculation, a lot of hearsay. And so I think she undermined her credibility a little bit, if I can be honest about that. I mean, I think that it would have been better for her to sort of downplay the expectations, coming out and say, we have so much evidence, we're going to just wipe the whole thing clean. Making a claim that bold and then not being able to deliver, a lot of people look at that like you are and they say, not so much, not too impressed. But that's kind of not what I'm talking about. I still think that she has some relevant claims. Largely, I think her remedies, what she's asking for, are way overbroad. We just went through the latest 4 from her in her new district court here in Arizona. I don't think a judge is going to grant any of that stuff. But a judge is, might be inclined to allow her to investigate a little bit further. Certainly, if she can get access into some of the Dominion software, if she can get any district court judge anywhere in the country to say, you know what? Yeah, enough of this. Dominion, give them the source code. Let them access, give them access to this. Bring your experts. We're going to record the whole thing. Sidney, bring your experts. Strip that machine down. Let us know what's going on with it. If she can win one of those battles and she finds some kraken, that's where you have that kill shot. But currently right now, I see a lot of it, and I agree that it's problematic and certainly worthy of a continued investigation, but it wasn't a punch to the gut like you were expecting with Kraken. It was, okay, all right, you're right. That does sound really, really bad. And yeah, this is a problem. We need to look into it, but it wasn't like that, the light went off and suddenly we know that this thing is over. So it's a good point. We have Wolfgang Deo again, who says, what is the legality of getting paid to vote for Biden? I plead the fifth, even though I didn't, but that is an abuse of mail-in. I lose secrecy. So there's some complaints actually about that I didn't really spend a lot of time on, because it's interesting, but you could probably find a lot of justifications for this. But there's some allegations that there were these voter drives where they were promising people jewelry and gift certificates and all sorts of incentives to go and vote, which is illegal, I think, in every state. You can't buy a vote. You can't incentivize people to go vote. And so they're claiming that was happening in certain communities and certain demographics. Largely in Arizona, the allegation was that it was taking place with the Native American communities. We have a lot of land here that have big populations of Native Americans, and the allegation was they were going over there and convincing them to vote. Now, I don't know what the details are there. Apparently there's some evidence of them, on Facebook that these organizations were posting on Facebook showing people holding a gift card, hey, Starbucks or whatever. And, I don't know how those things operated. So yes, if they're going in and they're saying, hey, madam, I need you to vote for Joe Biden. Here's a $25 gift card to Starbucks. You're going to vote for him? Okay, fill out the ballot. Yeah, that's an illegal transaction. But if you go and you run a contest or something like that, and you have a bunch of kids or, young adults or whatever, and you have a voter drive and you get them engaged in the process, I'm not going to kill myself over that. I think it's an interesting claim, one worth investigating, but just not super interesting. But it's not illegal. You can't pay people to go vote. John Sullivan, it's not legal. You cannot pay people to go vote. John Sullivan says, as a believer of the Second Amendment, which is to fight tyranny, what constitutes us using our Second Amendment against the tyrannical government? Well, John, the thoughts on that would be to not do that, essentially no matter what. I know a lot of people right now are really, really hot and really agitated, and they want to just take up arms and they want to go. And I'm hearing some Civil War talk. I'm hearing some martial law talk. That's just the most ridiculous stuff I think, personally, I can think of right now. I don't think we're anywhere close to that, nor should we be. I understand this concept, and I understand that people want a remedy, and I've had people ask me that a lot. Well, what's the solution? Well, if our government's not being representative of us, what should we do? Is the answer to split up? I get emails from people. I got an email from somebody today asking, what's the process for splitting the country up? He thinks that the right should get anything that's sort of east of the Rockies, and the left should get everything that's west of the Rockies, because they're already over there. They're already in California. And so he wants people to go over to Florida and split the country up. And he was serious. He's asking about it. And I think it's actually an interesting thought experiment. But, how would you do that? And that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. That's not the remedy that I envision. I think that the remedy here, regardless of who the next president is this stuff is movement-based. It's local. The people who are upset about this, you got to demand more out of your local politicians. You got to demand more out of your GOP. I am not in the camp of people who say, stop voting for senators, stop voting, stop getting involved in the process. If you want to withdraw yourself from the electoral process, then, what are you going to complain about? The remedy here is that the people get involved. They vote out the people who are not worthy of investigating these claims. If the next round of candidates, this next election in 2 years from now, when we have new House new House elections, new senator elections, new government, this is the time to go out there, recruit new candidates, generate a movement, generate the willpower to put the right people in office who are going to look into this stuff. Not, steal votes or prevent the public from getting access to investigating what happened. Those people all got to go, all of them, Republicans, liberals, all those people. If they're going to tell the people that we don't get access to our own government, you got to vote them out. I think that's the remedy. It's local, it's political. The people, we are the final check on the power structure. And so we got to get involved and do more about it. This idea that you're just going to sit on your couch and, not take action on it, I think is no longer effective. Now we have to, put the pressure on the people in the system to make some changes. But taking up arms, advocating for martial law, promulgating this idea of a civil war, it's totally unproductive. I think it undermines the credibility of the movement. It really scares people. It's not effective. It's not helpful at all. And so I just wouldn't, I really don't want to see that. I don't think we're anywhere close to that, quite frankly. I think that, if this doesn't go Trump's way, I think largely he's going to be considered a martyr, and many people are going to pick up the flag and keep marching forward. And voter integrity, electoral integrity, and largely these issues around Section 230. I mean, in my mind, and I've said it on this channel, there's a lot here that I think was collusion between a number of entities that is bigger than the election itself. I mean, we saw Facebook censoring things. We saw Twitter censoring things. They manipulated their ads, their search results on Google. They whitewashed stories across the board. All of the Hunter Biden Burisma stuff was not even covered. Nobody knew about Operation Warp Speed and what Donald Trump was doing to actually move the country forward. There was a media blackout on anything good for Donald Trump, and there was a media hyper focus on anything bad for Donald Trump for about 4 years. Okay, that's what people need to change. That's what people need to demand action on. And that's, I think, a lot more effective than any of this other, let's get the pitchforks out. I don't think that's effective. So I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment, but we're not there yet, John. Thanks for the question. T. Mark Hightower says, robust safeguards help ensure a win for the candidate favored by the deep state, regardless of the real votes. These robust safeguards failed in the presidential election of 2016. Yeah, I mean, I've said that here on this channel. The power structure is going to do what the power structure can to supplement and reinforce the power structure. We see that in every facet of our government and our society. That's how it works. We see this with police officers and prosecutors and judges. Anytime that we say, hey, we want to investigate a problem, government, I think you screwed something up, the government circles the wagons and they say, no, we didn't. Look, and they start enforcing all of their policies, and they want to just prevent you from being able to go in and disrupt the power structure. So if we have a problem with elections and we want to go complain to our election board about it, of course the election board is going to say to you, we did everything fine. This was all by the book. There's nothing to see here. Move on. This is the same thing that they've been saying in the media for a very long time. This is the most credible and secure election we've ever had in history. Well, really? Well, okay, then that's great. So let us in. Let us go see some of this stuff. Let us verify it independently, because we don't believe you. Right? Nor should we. Experts have been pretty wrong in 2020. They've missed the mark on just about everything that we've seen thus far. I don't need to go into the list. We have Geno's G, who says, please help me understand the civil versus criminal distinction in these matters. If these are violations of the law, why do we see so many civil lawsuits rather than criminal charges? It's a great question, Genos. Here's why that is. The election portion of this is all civil, right? The states, this is all civil issues. This is not criminal. Now, if Bill Barr, if a prosecutor, if the Department of Justice, if somebody was able to find somebody who was literally orchestrating or involved in a conspiracy or colluding, and they were manipulating the election themselves or through their company or through their organization, there would be criminal charges. We would see that. We just haven't identified that yet, unfortunately. This is what Donald Trump is talking about with Bill Barr and the Department of Justice. He's saying, why are you guys not getting involved in this? We read the memo from Bill Barr talking about the modification of the prosecution policies that would enable his team or the people a part of the DOJ to go out there and begin investigating these. And he basically said it's, if it was substantial enough that it's going to impact or reverse or change the course of the election, I authorize you to go do that. Apparently he hasn't found anything. He wasn't able to identify anybody who is responsible for concrete, connected, meaning that person did it, electoral fraud. They haven't found it yet. But if they did, then that would certainly be criminal. We have Super Plato Nano Man who says, if the Trump team is putting Powell and Wood under the bus for their terrible representation, why should we pay attention to any of their cases? It's a good question, Super Plato Nano Man. What we're talking about here is kind of the two different war zones which we've been describing here, the court of law and the court of public opinion. I think that largely in the court of public opinion, I think Sidney Powell and Lin Wood have been ineffective. I think we saw that yesterday with the Georgia rally. They said it was going to be a press conference. Lin Wood was out there pontificating about Lord knows what and ranting about, I don't even know. I mean, I didn't play any clips of it yesterday because it was bizarre, but that was something that I think was ineffective. That being said, some of their legal documents have some interesting arguments in them. We've covered them both. We covered the Lin Wood lawsuit in Georgia. We covered almost all of Sidney Powell's lawsuits thus far. There are some good claims in there. There are some good arguments. Just because they're not so effective in the court of public opinion doesn't mean that they're ineffective in the court of law. And at least they're raising some good issues, and I think they're requesting the right information. They're requesting a lot of the same things that we want. More information about the voting systems and about the back-end operations on how this stuff works. So, you can have, there's a lot of this out there today that, you're either on the team or you're off the team. Either you're pro martial law or you're not. You're pro voting for the senators in Georgia or you're not. You're pro, let's sort of see what the GOP can do to rebuild itself, or you're not. You're damn the GOP unless they come onto our side of the team, and so you're seeing this like division in people in both sides of the political spectrum, quite frankly. You're seeing a split in the left between the Bernie supporters and the AOC supporters who are upset with some of the prospective cabinet positions and administrative positions that Joe Biden is proposing, who seem to be a lot more centrist than what the left wing wants. So there's cracks in that edifice. On the other side, with the Republicans and the right wing people, you're seeing the same thing. This Breitbart versus Lin Wood debate that's going on, and you're on one side of the team or the other. Everybody's unfollowing and unsubscribing and just pissed off at each other all over the place. And you're like, all right, guys, we can talk about ideas and personalities and effective techniques and ineffective techniques. We can do those things. And so when it comes to Lin Wood and Sidney Powell, some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And the good stuff, we want to say, okay, maybe a little bit more of that and a less of some of the not so effective rallying, rah-rah, the walls of Jericho stuff that Lin Wood likes to pull. We have TZ1052NY. Play the video where everyone is sent home and they pull the ballots from under the tables. The Attorney General fought to prevent the video from coming out. Yeah, we are going to play that. I think Miss Faith is trying to find that for us as we speak. We have one from Dr. EMB in the house who says, could the SCOTUS completely void this election and say this is all too screwed up? New election for the president and all other races redone, military conducting it, paper-only ballots, unless requested. It's a good question, Doctor. It's one that I get quite frequently. I think that they could, it would be completely unprecedented, nothing like this ever in the history of our country, but they could. Now, would they? I really, really give that about a 0% chance. The idea that a Supreme Court is going to come in and mandate a new election for the entire country, I think that remedy is way too overbroad, and I don't think that the court would do that. It's just too big. It would really sort of destabilize too many things, I think. They're not inclined to do that. And remember, the Supreme Court operates off legitimacy, which has been the word of this last 2 months. Legitimacy, legitimacy, legitimacy. That's the only power they have, is by the public perception of being legitimate. And so what they're going to want to do is craft the narrowest solution humanly possible in order to answer the legal questions. They're going to keep the scope of this thing super narrow. And this is why I'm saying that this Wisconsin lawsuit is a little bit more, in my mind, palatable for the justices, because they can go into Wisconsin and they can identify specific areas where the Wisconsin Commission, the election officials there, where they deviated from the state statutes, where they screwed up specifically, so they can craft a remedy that fixes that screw up. They say, well, all right, in Dane County, the Dane County court, the Dane County clerk person said that you could do this. Therefore, all of the people who did that, their votes don't count because their votes were illegal. They were in violation of the legislature. You had somebody else tell them to do it. Sorry, it was a government official. The penalty, government, is that you get slapped on the hand for your malfeasance. The penalty for the government here is your votes don't get to count because you screwed it up. How else are you going to penalize the government? The way that we penalize the government in criminal law is by letting the person charged with a crime walk. We let them walk. because they haven't proved their case. That's the penalty. So how do you penalize the government? You say, okay, well, you don't get that. Your position here is that everything you did was legitimate and by the book. We don't think it was. Those results don't count. Same thing with a criminal conviction. You can't convict that guy because your cops broke the Constitution. They entered into his apartment without a warrant or without exigent circumstances or any of those things. The penalty needs to match. And that's why I don't think that we're going to see the Supreme Court do anything quite so broad. But thanks, Doctor. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the generous super chats. As always, really appreciate you being a part of the program. We have Demetrius Parham, who says Trump's team just finished a long hearing down here in Georgia. The suitcase full of ballots was under the table. That was crazy. Yeah, so Miss Faith is going to try to find that for us. I did see it, and it's wild. Rolly A. Murray says fraud equals this video on YouTube. Video from Georgia shows suitcase filled up after the ballots. After the poll workers left, it's a must-see. Dr. EMB again with another super chat says voter ID, fingerprints, 1 week voting period, lots of social distancing, etc., etc. Say early February 2021. Adjust the time it takes to this on the back end, i.e. 2 to 3 months of the term. P.S. I hope you become a professor. That's funny, Doctor. Not so sure about the professor part. I kind of like this YouTube thing. It's kind of fun. I love talking to you guys, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot, and I think we're adding a little bit to the conversation in our little tiny small sliver of a way, and so I appreciate that nice feedback. But voter ID, fingerprints, 1 week voting period, lots of social distancing. Yeah, so. I think she's piggybacking back on her prior statement about ordering a new election. If the Supreme Court were to go through and order that, would they be able to craft a resolution that way? I don't think so. I think that largely, elections are, as the Constitution says, they're governed by the states, by the state legislatures. And this is not something that the Supreme Court, we don't want the Supreme Court acting as the legislature. So if something like that were to happen and we literally thought that the entire election was fraudulent, this would probably be something that you'd have to literally amend the Constitution to change, big asks here. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen, but I understand where you're going with that. And I think it's a good, thoughtful, productive way to trying to solve the problem. I'm just not sure that we're going to see anything like that from the courts. We have Becky Fay, who says Dr. Linda Lee Tarver testified. She worked at the Secretary of State of Michigan for 29 years. She says it's terrible fraud, has been for years. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that type of stuff, Becky. And that stuff is compelling. These people who've been working for the government for 20 years, 19, 15 years. We read another affidavit from another woman who had indicated that she had been doing this stuff for 10 years. She could tell what a real ballot felt like and what it looked like. And she was looking at a ton of ballots that didn't feel like the other ones did, and so that type of, I think, perception is valuable, and I think people will put a lot of credibility on that. So thanks for bringing that up. We have Rolly Murray, who says that is a 3% swing as Trump lost 2 votes and Biden got 1, so a 3-vote change over 100 votes, 2 ballots, but 3% effect. And he's right. Yeah, we kind of I tried to mumble through that math myself. And it's exactly right. So 3%, it's a big number. It's way bigger than the margin in Arizona. So we'll see what happened today at that hearing. I'm not sure what the results were there, but they may be authorizing a bigger investigation, a bigger audit. The attorneys who filed the motion to continue their investigation today were asking for 2,500 ballots as part of the next audit. We have Kenneth Fielder, who says, as a truck driver myself, I can tell you that most often than not, most trailers get sealed before or prior to leaving the shipper. Only information you get is on the BOL, the bills of lading, and the driver just ensures that it makes the destination. Yeah, so we represent a lot of truck drivers actually in Arizona, a lot. Arizona really picks on the truck drivers, and thank you for that, Kenneth Fielder. I appreciate that. And, Kenneth probably knows this, but in Arizona, almost every single commercial trucking violation is a crime. You can be charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, which is the same classification as a DUI if you're a truck driver and you're not wearing your seatbelt, right? In Arizona, it's like a $70 fine if you're a citizen, like a civilian, a regular non-commercial driver. You don't have a CDL license, just like me. I don't have my CDL license. So if I don't wear my seatbelt, I get a $70 fine, not a big deal. If you're a commercial truck driver, you're not wearing your seatbelt, it's a Class 1 misdemeanor. It's the same as a DUI. It's very serious. But he's exactly right. The bill of lading and a lot of this stuff is the chain of custody there is tight for good reason. They don't want you smuggling a bunch of stuff and interfering with shipments throughout the country. Drivers are on the road for millions of miles. And so it's important that this stuff is orderly and organized, and there's a paper trail and there's a chain of custody that's documented. Where is that data? Where is that information? Can we see it, please? I would like to see it. Does it even exist? Probably not. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, my internet in AZ is going haywire, likely ISP level, not sure. Might be the start of the private sector trying to shut things down. Bring it. So that's from Wolfgang Deo. You know, in Arizona, I'm not sure which one you're using. Probably Cox. Cox can be a little bit...
At about 8.
A little bit finicky. All right. Miss Faith sent over the suitcase video. So let's take a look at that. This is a good one. Let's play this here. Let me turn this chat off quickly. And let's watch this
8 o'clock
video.
in the morning.
Nope, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. All right.
We're going to roll this back and show it to you. There you go. So now they're going to start pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there. So the same person who's staying behind now, the same person who cleared the place out under the pretense that we're going to stop counting, is the person who put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table.
Look at that. See that suitcase? Oh my goodness, there's a suitcase right there. So somebody just backed that up. Where'd that
from
come
underneath
from?
the table. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table.
Wait a minute. What the?
Put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table.
Look at this guy in the red. Look.
Yeah, upper right hand, you see the gentleman in the red. So he just pulled one out.
Where is he going with that? Bringing it around the back.
So what are these ballots doing there, separate from all the other ballots? And why are they only counting them whenever the place is cleared out with no witnesses?
Everybody's gone. It's just 4
is the
people.
question. So these machines can process about 3,000 ballots an hour. You have multiple machines there, and they're there for 2 hours. So you do the math. How many ballots went through those machines in those 2 hours when there was no one there to supervise, to be present, consistent with your statutes and rules, to supervise the tabulation? We believe that could easily be, and probably is certainly, beyond the margin of victory in this race.
Whoa. All right. So we just saw that there. Literally pulling suitcases out from underneath the tables. Oh, boy. Is there an explanation for that? Somebody send Miss Faith a message. Did they explain that? Does anybody have a basis for what that was all about? Why were they doing that? All right, let's get that chat back on. We have Kyle, last name, who says, what is the likelihood that states do not send the necessary electors to either candidate on December 8th, 14th? Would that offer enough time to settle these election allegations? Also, thank you for what you do. Thanks, Kyle, last name. I appreciate that. Very nice super chat, and I appreciate that. So let me, the likelihood that they're going to send, I would guess that any state that has certified their election thus far is going to send their votes on December 14th. That's the day they got to do it. They're going to send it all over to the House. Now, that's not the end of the game there, right? Remember, there are already Congress people, and there's Senator Ted Cruz, who's also issued a letter to the Supreme Court. So he has not confirmed that he's going to be willing to go into the Congress and object to any of these votes being counted on the House floor. He hasn't said that yet, but many people are speculating that, if the Supreme Court doesn't hear that, and he just made it an appeal to the Supreme Court to say, hey, guys, we need you to step in here and give us some guidance on what this election is going to look like. If they don't do that, then he may have to act on his conscience. He might have to go in and maybe join a House Republican in objecting to some of the votes. And he's got some good constitutional arguments to do it. We made this case out of Pennsylvania. He may object to the Pennsylvania votes because they literally violated their Constitution in my reading. One man's opinion of it, Justice Alito seems to agree with me, and so does Gorsuch, and so does Thomas, and so does Ted Cruz. So I think I'm in good company there when I say that Pennsylvania violated their Constitution. They know they did it. They're leaning on some abstract, superpower as a result of the COVID pandemic, but it's not okay. Like what they did was not okay, and the Supreme Court is not going to allow that to sit. So We will see if Ted Cruz joins a different congressperson and they object to these votes, then even though the state sent them over to Congress, they may not actually be counted on the floor. I think that's actually a more likely outcome than the states not sending their votes. I think that largely the states are probably going to certify their elections unless these legislatures, grow some fortitude, let's say, then I think that they're going to send them over. I think the writing is sort of on the wall on that. December 14th is right around the corner, unless there's something that's very, very profound that is released or new information. Or like, for example, if Dr. Kelli Ward comes back out, they do a secondary audit. They find that second audit reveals that there are, it's a 3% error rate across the board. Okay, the legislature then at that point might come back and say, "You're now enough's enough already. It's time to act." And so we'll see what happens, Kyle. I don't think December 14th is enough time to settle these election allegations. Is the second part of your question? I think we're going to go all the way up to January 6th. Rachel S. says, Rob, you have beautiful teeth. That's all I have today. Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that, and it's very nice and appreciated. I thank you very much for that. I think I'm probably blushing right now. All right. Super Plato Nanoman says, Rudy and Trump team is losing case after case. They're not coming close. All failures. Let's call it what it is. Only Trump bots are not convinced. So Super, I understand that perspective. I understand your position. And I even think it's a good argument. You could say that. You could look at the scoreboard and you could say, absolutely. If you look at those cases, if you go on, you follow Mark Elias, who I'm a fan of, by the way. He's doing good work. I don't agree with him politically, but he runs democracydocket.com over there. His team, whoever's running that thing, they're doing a great job. They got all the complaints, all the responses, all of those things. He's doing it because he is very vehemently anti-Trump, but he's still doing good work, and I can appreciate it and say thank you for helping us compile all of this data. It's a nice job. That being said, his perspective and a lot of what the people on sort of the other side of this equation are saying are mirroring what you're saying right here, right? There's, all of these evidence, all of these cases are not even close. Why are you even bothering with this stuff? It's all a bunch of psycho Trump lunatics who can't let this go. I disagree with that. I think that even though the numbers don't particularly look good, these cases have been dismissed largely on procedural problems, largely on, I think, political problems. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, all of these laches arguments are just nonsense. Real lawyers know that. They go, are you kidding me? Because this is not something that is a common justification for dismissing a lawsuit. And like I said, in Pennsylvania, they tried to split it both ways. You have no standing at the beginning, and there were already lawsuits pending in Pennsylvania. And now they're saying, you can't bring it after the fact because it's too late. So you can't bring them before, you can't bring them after. If you bring them before, you have no standing. If you bring them after, you have no ability to make your claim because of laches. But there was already lawsuits pending from the Democrats largely to modify the rules that got them out of alignment with their underlying constitution, which implicated a federal question, which means I think it should go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court should come back and rule on it. That's one sort of road that it can go. A federal constitutional question has not been addressed by the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court does address it and Trump wins, doesn't matter what the record is. He could be 1 in 100. Doesn't matter. Supreme Court's the only one that matters. They haven't weighed in yet. So, until they do, or until they say we're not, it's an open ball game, right? It's not a 1-49. It's not a scoreboard. Trump's team needs one. They just need one. And it's happening all over the country. They're filing new lawsuits with better evidence, and judges are starting to, I think, feel some of the public pressure. Judges are just like people. They want to do things that the people want them to do. I mean, largely, they're not elected positions, so they don't have the same pressure. Many of them, some judges are, but many of them are not. But when there is pressure on them, they feel it just like you would, just like I would. And so now we're starting to see a little bit of movement on these things. We had a hearing in Nevada. We had a hearing today with Kelli Ward. We're starting to see more of the evidence presented. Largely, these lawsuits have not presented any evidence. I have not seen one lawsuit in federal court or state court or a Supreme Court or anywhere where it's a witness with an affidavit testifying about what they saw in front of a judge. I haven't seen that yet. I've seen a lot of oral arguments with Rudy Giuliani. We saw some oral arguments today with Kelli Ward. Things are moving closer to that, but they're not there yet. So, you're free to call it. You're welcome to call it. I'm not there yet. We'll get there. This is gonna get called one way or the other, but we're not there yet. right? I am not going to be talking about this in July of next year, saying Donald Trump is still fighting this thing to win, right? We're going to know on January 6th what the House does. And by January 20th, if they don't have a decision, then we're going to have a different president, regardless. So I am of the mindset we can keep talking about this thing. We can keep dissecting these issues. There is a lot of energy around this topic, a lot. People are really hot and heated over this. And so what we're just trying to do is dissect it a little bit, explain it in from a different perspective, from a criminal defense attorney, from somebody who reads these things all day long. I'm just offering my perspective on it. I have always largely been somebody skeptical of the government. I don't take them at their word, never have, probably never will. And so what we want to do is just hold them accountable. That's all we're asking for. We're not asking to overthrow the government. We just want to say, hey, give us some access to some of this stuff. We're the people. You ran our elections. Shouldn't we get to see how you did it? Is that too much to ask? That's all we're asking for. If they get access to the records and it's all good and kosher and there's nothing to complain about, fine. End of story. We'll move on. Cheers to President Biden. Wish him well. Hope he doesn't ruin America. Let's move on with the thing. But we're not there yet. And we have some time, so we'll keep talking about it. We have FKB 1982 says the fact that Harris isn't giving up her seat is telling. I saw that. I could come up with some alternative justifications for that. It's kind of a good exercise. Why would she not give up her Senate seat? Well, because the election is being contested. I probably wouldn't give it up either, right? That's not an indication that she knows that they lost the election. I think another justification would be she's probably getting some pretty good security briefings on that Senate Intelligence Committee. So she's getting access to a lot of things that she's not quite ready to give up yet. So I don't think that is too dispositive. I don't think that tells us one way or the other, but it is interesting. It is an interesting thing to note. So thanks for that, FKB 1982. We have Dirk Kessler in the House who says, is the fact that some Republican poll watchers weren't allowed to watch the count enough to send this to a congressional vote, or do they need more? So Dirk, the way that would work is it's up to the Congress people to make those objections. So if you are, there's kind of two things here that we're talking about. So you could either go through a process whereby there's enough public motivation and pressure in the state that the state legislatures take control of their electoral votes, do something with them, hold on to them, give them to Donald Trump or whatever that looks like, in order to keep either candidate from being at 270 or above. If it's at 270 or above that, then that person is the president. If it's under that, then the House would go to what's called a contingent election. So if there was a scenario where those electoral votes were under that threshold, you could have a congressional vote, which I think is what you're talking about. But they have to be under that number. If that's not the case, then whoever has the most votes is going to be the next president. Similarly, if no state has already withdrawn their votes, then what you would do then at that point is when the votes are being cast, let's say they're being cast as they're currently being read. So Joe Biden has 306 electoral votes, I think. And if they start reading those into the record in Congress, then what Congress and what the Congress people can do is object to those. They can say, nope, those don't, no, we're going to object to those. Here's why. And they can have a debate about those on the House floor, according to the Congressional Research Service. So you can take a look at that document. I've shared it multiple times. It fleshes out really what's going on there. So, again, what Congress does, what the legislature does, that's not a court order. That's not from the courts. They can do that on their own. These Congress people, these senators, they can object to the votes being read into the record on their own. They don't need the courts to tell them to do that. That's why Rudy and his team and Trump and his team are pursuing both avenues. They're appealing to the legislature. They're also appealing to the American public, who's going to put pressure on the legislature. We had some polls this week. 39% of the people think, yeah, this thing wasn't so good. So they can go that route. Meanwhile, they're also fighting in the courts, in the court of law. And so the courts are a whole different ballgame, but the Republican Congress people don't need that in order to go out there and change the course of the election. We also have one from the show who says, my hero. Thanks to the show. I appreciate that for that nice super chat. We have Daniel Groff in the house with a super chat. No question on that, though. Thanks, Daniel. We have Lib Hunter Z. Who says, don't you think the Trump team has to bring a working idea of how the Dominion count can be the same as the paper ballot count? If the machines were fraudulent, a recount would show unless they were laundering or backfilling. Yeah. And Lib Hunter, I agree with you on that. And so yesterday, I think we were reading through some of Sidney Powell's new complaint, and there was some information on that. And she had, one of her theories was that the ballot machine itself. So you have a ballot marking device, which would be the touch screen that you enter your vote into. You go into the ballot processing center, you punch in your code or your vote, Joe Biden for president, into the ballot marking device. That machine then prints out a receipt because you need a paper trail, according to the law. The receipt will then print out a QR code that doesn't necessarily match the text receipt that the human can read. So you have a receipt that says, I voted for Joe Biden, or I voted for Donald Trump, but the QR code says, nope, you actually voted for Joe Biden. And that was in her claim. That's one of her allegations, that the software was sort of making a division, branching off there and splitting the votes that way. And then I saw another article from somebody in Discord. I think it was Meg, actually. Meg Glide, I think is the username, if I'm remembering. She sent over an article, I think it was from one of the other main news sources, that said that they actually checked that. They actually checked the receipts and they matched what the ballot marking device said, and they matched the paper trail, and it all zeroed out. It was all the same, and there was no problem reconciling the two different sides. So if that is true, then I would 100% agree with you, Lib Hunter, that we need more of an explanation on that, because that doesn't make any sense to me. If the machine is splitting the votes, it should be pretty easy to sort of backtrack that and verify that. And I haven't seen any evidence thus far to do it. We have Ron B., who says, in the Georgia Senate oversight hearing today, a senator asked the Secretary of State, Rep did not have an answer for the agreement that was arranged after the state law was changed. Yeah, I think that's largely what we're seeing. A lot of people were filing lawsuits left and right. Everything was pouring in a number of different states from a number of different special interest groups. Were suing to change everything. And in the chaos, in the gray area that was mud in the water as a result of all these very quick, very recent changes, people kind of did what they want. These election boards, like we saw in this latest lawsuit we covered today, they just kind of changed things. They just said, yeah, you're indefinitely detained now. You can go vote without ID. No problem. Just go on this website, fill out the form, skip that part. Don't upload an ID. If you want to check it out later, you're welcome to do that, but don't have to do it this time. So I would agree with you on that there's a lot of confusion out there. We have SSW Lamb, who says, hi, Rob and Faith. How about the truck who was told to drive 24 cases of ballots from New York to PA and his truck just disappearing? Is it enough to invalidate PA? It's a good question. I did see that. I saw a little bit of his testimony. And again, I mean, in my mind, it's enough to throw out some pretty big buckets of votes. I would like to know more specifics about what was going on there. Where did they come from? I would, again, as we saw from Kenneth Fielder above in a prior super chat, he was explaining that there's a bill of lading. We'd like to see that. Where did that come from? Who ordered it? There's a lot more information here. You want to get these types of cases into court so you can use the subpoena power of the court to go get all these documents. Right? Where did this all come from? But you need judges and you need the court's power, the judicial power, in order to go and do a lot of that stuff. It's called discovery. And thus far, the Democrats and the government in almost every single state, including the ACLU and a number of different other organizations who are jumping in to assist them with their defense of these claims, they're being as stonewally as you can be. They really want to prevent people from going in and getting access to any of this material. So I think it's enough to warrant further investigation for sure. Now it's up to the team to convince the judges accordingly. Rolly Murray says, before Civil War splitting things up, we need to control 34 states and call for a constitutional convention for the win. Trump could make it happen. Yeah. I mean, that's the type of stuff that I am more open to, right? It's the stuff that is prescribed in the Constitution, the stuff that the founders have already thought about. They said, listen, there's a potential for this to be bad. And if it is going to be bad, then we're going to just defer and take it right back to the state legislatures or to the state representatives, the bodies of government that are most closely connected to the people, to the constituency. If you are the Secretary of State of the United States, or your federal president, or you're a judge in a local state level, or any one of those things, you're not really sort of a function of democracy in many ways that a legislature is. And so that's what they're asking for. That's what the Constitution prescribes. If this stuff goes south, the default is to go back to the body of government, to the entity, to the branch that is most closely connected to the people. That's the legislature. And there's a mechanism in the Constitution for utilizing that. So we'll see if that happens. We have Desmond Hansen, who says, yesterday, when I commented on the Michigan hearing, I didn't realize that two occurred. The Michigan Senate hearing that took place on Tuesday was the eye-opener. Yeah. Is that the one I played clips from? A lot of clips. I mean, there's a lot. These hearings are going on all over the country. It's a lot, and people are paying attention. Lava Java Lava sends over a cup of coffee. Thanks, Lava, for that. Appreciate the super chat. We have Bethany Lawson, who says, what about revote in specific states, if not nationwide? Sorry if you already commented on that. I missed it. So, Bethany, yeah, that is actually that is a remedy that is being kicked around. We saw that. I forget what lawsuit I read that from, but there was case law that said that, I think it was, it might have been the Nevada lawsuit. I can't remember right now. Too many of them. But the idea was that in some instances, a special election, a renewed election would be necessary. Now, two issues why I think that's not going to happen. Number one, I don't think there's really time for it. I think in order to organize and practically implement and run a new election, I think that's going to put us probably in the middle of next year, and that it's done and over by then, right? It's too little, too late, unless something else happens. And this really the second reason is because I just don't think that there is the local willpower to do that. I don't think that the legislature would do that. They're the ones who govern how to run their elections. They would have to go in and demand a new election. I think that is a bigger ask than them just apportioning their electors the way that they see fit. So I think I'm not sure a new election is a realistic possibility anywhere in the country. I understand why the idea of it sounds good. I just don't think that practically it will happen. And I think politically that there's no willpower. The real mechanism here is not a new election. It's the legislature just takes the power back and reapportions their electors. That's it. Pretty simple. We've already voted on the legislature. We already know. That's about as representative as we can get at this current time, our current legislature. So if we say the popular vote of our state was so compromised, was so illegitimate that we're going to throw that out, the next best thing, the next thing that is most closely connected to the people is the legislature. It's not the judges. It's not the governor. It's not the Secretary of State. It's your individual legislatures. Because think about that. If you have a senator, right? My representation from my senator in Arizona, how many people do we have now? 7 million people? 8 million people? It's one senator to 8 million people. So I have 1/8 millionth share of representation for our new senator, Mark Kelli. That's it. It's not much, right? State House or the federal House of Representation, it's much smaller number than that, but still not too big. I think it's like 150,000, 158,000 people. Not a lot, but our local, a lot, but still not real good representation. But when you narrow that down to a state representative or a state senator, it's a lot smaller margin. I have much better representation ratio with that local politician. So that is the most democratic version of what we're trying to do here. We want the representatives to enact the will of the people. We just said that the popular vote in our state doesn't count. It's irrelevant. It's compromised. So the next best thing is that our legislature goes and takes action on that. So long answer, Bethany, but thanks for the question. We have Majestic Waffle says, well, if this is all a scheme by both sides to get Pelosi to become president? And it's an interesting question, Majestic Waffle, but I certainly think that probably nobody in America really wants that. Nobody. I'm not even sure Nancy Pelosi wants that. All right, we have Wolfgang Deo, who says, at Social Crusader, if you really believe what you were saying, how about putting money behind it? So Wolfgang Deo is throwing down smack officially on this channel in a super chat. Whew. That's heavy. We have Ron B, who says, Rob, there are election officials, senators. They didn't have any answers for this video being shown in today's hearing. Yeah, I can imagine why. Ron B. So Ron B's responding to the video that we just played about 4 people after all of the poll workers and observers leave for the night. They literally pull out suitcases from under the tables, open them up, pull out ballots, take them over to the counting center, start running them through the machine. It's horrendous. What can you do but laugh at it? It's insane. All right. We have Isaac Castillo, who says, what is the likelihood that people get prosecuted if connections are made to fraud, and you expect higher UPS to be prosecuted or just the low level, or higher ups to be prosecuted or just the low level participants? Isaac, I don't have a lot of faith that we're going to see any prosecutions on this thing. I mean, you have to have an active Department of Justice. You have to have prosecutors who are interested in this. I think that, probably, I don't know or spend a lot of time with a lot of U.S. attorneys or federal prosecutors or anybody in the Department of Justice. We mostly practice in the state of Arizona, but from what I can gather, just sort of living in the legal sphere, which is a pretty small community, I'm pretty plugged in. They're not fans of Donald Trump either, so they're not out there pounding the streets, hitting the pavement, trying to go and find any of this type of fraud. Now, I have a lot of faith that there are good prosecutors there and some good people who are looking into it. But I mean, think about what we have seen thus far as it relates to Donald Trump. They've been investigating him largely for the last 4 years, and a lot of it without good reason, in my opinion. They've also totally ignored a lot of the other things that many people have had concerns with, largely involving Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, right? So, once you reach that certain echelon, if you're, Mark Zuckerberg and you're donating $250 million to this, Get Out the Vote organization, are they going to prosecute him? Very unlikely. This is the whole point of this show, quite frankly, in this channel. It's watching the watchers. It's because there's an entire different strata. There's an oligarchy that sort of is immune from prosecution, immune from the laws. They get their people on the insides to manipulate the votes. I mean, think about Hillary Clinton and the whole James Comey debacle, right? Where he literally adjusted his memorandum saying that she went from being grossly negligent, which was criminal. Her behavior with her emails was grossly negligent. Deleted that line, called it, seriously, whatever he called it. He changed the phrase because grossly negligent was in the statute. That's illegal. But if she's not grossly negligent, I think it was extremely careless. So he changed grossly negligent, which is illegal, to extremely careless. And suddenly it's not a crime anymore. That's because she's Hillary Clinton. He's the FBI director. And so they just change things in order to prevent people from prosecuting one another. It's not so good. We have it's a complicated name. We have L.Y.O. Lyobomir, who says, is the floor vote a simple majority, must pass both House and Senate? So it's a great question. So the House elects the president. The Senate elects the vice president. That's how it splits up. And yeah, it's a simple majority. So the Republicans have more states than the Democrats do. So if it goes to the House, Trump's going to be the president again. We have Dennis Daly, who says, what happens if the Senate agrees with an objection and the House disagrees, please? So my understanding is you need somebody from both chambers in order to raise one of those objections. So if it's just one, it's not enough. So currently there is one congressman who's on record who's already indicated that he is going to be challenged in this stuff. They're looking for a senator, and I'm not sure if it's going to be Ted Cruz. This is a big meatball to take a bite out of. Any senator who's going to lash themselves onto this is really putting their political career on the line here. If this works in their favor, they may have a bright future. If not, maybe not. So I think it needs one from both. I'm not positive on that, but I think that's what the rules say. All right, there's enough there to invalidate election in Georgia. Do you think that Dominion servers will now be banned? Thanks for the great coverage as usual. So no, I don't think that the Dominion servers will be banned. I think that largely what we're going to see is probably a rebranding of Dominion. Dominion will sell itself. They'll piece themselves out. They'll modify. They'll part out their company. We're not going to hear Dominion in 2022. Well, maybe in 2022, 2024. I don't think Dominion is a thing anymore. Pieces of Dominion may still be around, but they're going to just totally ditch this name. Just like we saw, I think it was back during, when I was a kid, the Diebold machines, the ES&S machines, we've been through these conversations before. Everybody knows these machines have problems. Everybody, even the liberals, CNN's talked about it. Everybody has talked about it. Everybody. Now they want to just ignore all of that. You can go and find all of these articles from literally the last decade. Hundreds of thousands of articles explaining how bad all of this stuff is. Now it's all being whitewashed because they're not interested in it. But I think there's going to be a major political, public relations maneuver that will make Dominion go away. Probably won't hear from them again. We have from Ma about the suitcases. So we have Actual evidence, response, fake CGI, staged. Okay, so it could be, right? The suitcase thing might be totally staged. I guess it looked pretty official to me, but you could have, you could easily recreate that, no question about it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm sure somebody will figure that out. We have Teacher Man 1955 who says the SCOTUS districts have been reassigned. Does that affect anything? Thanks. So Teacher Man, yeah, that happened a couple weeks ago. No, I don't think that it does actually change anything. We saw that there were some interesting reassignments, though. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but it was interesting that a lot of the conservatives were assigned to a lot of the battleground states. So specifically Wisconsin, Georgia, I think Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania may have gone to Amy Coney Barrett. I'm not sure on that. Arizona, I think we got Kagan. Some people are probably happy about that, not so much, but I don't think that it's particularly relevant. Interesting, certainly interesting, definitely coincidental, but not particularly relevant. We have Matt Jackson who says, need to team up with Viva Barnes and Nate and Uncivil for some streams. Matt, I've thought about that. I like all those guys. I watch them all regularly. It would be kind of a surreal thing to do a live stream with them. Maybe that will happen in the future, but thanks for the suggestion, Matt Jackson. We have Tunes on Strings. Do you think the new video evidence will change things going forward? No one can call it a conspiracy anymore. Well, it sounds like some people are going to call that a conspiracy. It could be CGI, it could be staged, it could be fake. Who knows? Sounds like to me, it looked pretty legitimate to me. That looked like an actual balloting spot. Looked like people were actually pulling ballots out of suitcases. And we'll see. Somebody will dive into that. Again, the chain of custody. If this was presented in front of a legislative hearing, they should have a chain of custody for that video. Truthfully, they should know where that came from. Who requested the video? From whom did they request it from? So where did it come from? Obviously, that's a government building, so they must have records somewhere. So who requested it? There's probably an official record request. Who copied it onto the DVD or the USB drive or transmitted it over? There's a record of all this stuff. So somebody should be able to take that video back and prove that it was from that location on that night at that time. Should be very easy to prove. They should already be able to prove it. Is it going to change anything? No, I don't think it's going to change any. It depends who you ask. I mean, for people who are open to the idea that maybe our elections weren't as legitimate as we think they are, the people who are open to having that conversation, yeah, it's going to change things for them. The people who are on the fence, it's probably going to change things for them. But the people who are not interested in this conversation, and it's a lot of people, a lot of the blogs that I was traditionally following, I'm kind of shocked at how quickly they've abandoned any conversation about it. You can see that a lot of people are making editorial decisions now, right? Actually, a couple weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, making these very concrete editorial decisions to say, we're not going to be talking about this stuff anymore at all. We're not going to talk about it. And they just stopped covering it. So those people who don't want to even explore this stuff, they may not ever even see that video. You understand that? You understand what a big portion of America may never see that video? Probably most of America will never see that video. It's kind of scary, even though it looks like it's provided that it's legitimate and authentic and they verify it. If it is authentic and legitimate and they verify it, most of the country will never see that. All right, we have Joe Lowry who says, thought people arrested for defying shutdown orders so they eat. At what point does the Constitution suggest physical removal of tyrants? So, the Constitution itself doesn't really make mention of that. There's no formal way to engage in a revolution in the document. One of the ways to do it is by voting. It's, the people are the final check on the power structure. So the people have to just get tired of it and they got to vote, honestly. And they need to vote locally. I know many people are upset now by saying that, well, the elections are totally rigged and fraudulent. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of evidence of that. Doesn't mean you can't play the system anymore. If you get out of the system, then you lose the game. It's like you want to win a game, a board game. The only way to win is by playing in it. And if you have to go in and, be aggressive with the rules and enforcing the rules and demanding that the rules are followed, that's what you got to do. But it's political will. It's not violence. It's not uprisings or overthrowing things. I understand how that might feel good. It's not particularly good. It doesn't work out well. Typically what ends up happening is the more powerful, more dictatorial type of person seizes power. We as a people end up losing more freedoms as a result of people suddenly clamoring for security in the face of the adversity. And so it's not good. The right way to do it is to go to the polls. It's to share this show. Honestly, it's about getting more people engaged in the conversation. That's how this works. And so that's what I think the remedy is. The other remedy in the Constitution is to amend the Constitution. The American people could stand up and say, listen, we're going to have an amendment that this is how elections are going to be run in the future. There's going to be a paper trail, and these are the rules. You have to go vote in person. There is no more mail-in balloting unless you meet one of these exceptions. We could do some things that would incentivize states to get on a more regular, consistent, verifiable, credible, uniform voting process. And if the American people demand that, the government has to respond. So that's what the remedy is. Amend the Constitution, pass laws, and vote these losers out who say that we as the people don't have the ability to go and investigate our own government, our own election process. It's insanity to me. All right, Mike says, can Biden delegates change their minds based on all these claims of election voter fraud and cast their votes for Trump? So largely, okay, so can Biden delegates change their minds based on the claims of, yeah, they can. So there are a number of different, these are called faithless electors. So a number of different states make it a crime or make it illegal to be a faithless elector. So I think in some states they could do that. In some other states they could not do that. If they do that, there would be a bunch of lawsuits around this and the courts would have to settle it out for sure. But if somebody was a Democrat and they wanted to pledge their electoral vote to Trump and their state made that a crime or basically remove them from that position. And I think there are statutes that do that. So if you say, I'm going to go vote for Biden, you change your vote. Simultaneously with that change in vote, it revokes your power to be an elector still. So you physically cannot go and cast your vote for somebody else other than the person you're elected to cast your vote for. And if that were to be the case, I'm going to imagine there's a lot of litigation that would take place around that issue. So you may see some faithless electors come out. I doubt it, though. I think that those people are probably going to be pretty much buckled in. So Meg Glide is not a female. Sorry, Meg, or that must be Me Glide, maybe. So Me Glide is a male, and that's probably something I should be a little bit more careful on my pronouns about right now, because it's complicated these days. Even more super chats coming in. My goodness, we have Murray Rothbard who says appeals to circuit courts. Example: Georgia case to the 11th Circuit, Thomas assigned to the 11th Circuit. When would Thomas get involved? Only if it goes full to SCOTUS. So, okay, Murray. So, yeah, so I understand what you're asking for now. So think back. There was an example of this prior to these reassignments. We saw this in Pennsylvania. If you look up the Pennsylvania case, or you go back in one of our old videos, we covered this, but there was litigation that was pending before the election took place. In Pennsylvania, the litigation went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was on the door of the Supreme Court, literally knocking, hey, let us in. This is going to be a big problem here in a couple weeks. Let us come talk to you about this. It was a split 4-4, and Judge Roberts joined with the left wing of the court. So Amy Coney Barrett was not on the court. Therefore, it's 4-4 split, which means the lower court ruling stands. So the Supreme Court kicked this thing back down, and the lower court just upheld the change in the rule, which is why we have all these problems. So they could have solved it. They didn't. One of the things that the Supreme Court did when they sent it back down, saying we're not going to look at it right now, is they told them to segregate the ballots. So any ballot that came in after Election Day, they were going to put into a different bucket. That bucket might be challenged. It might be questionable. And then that is what they would they would throw out if the litigation does go back up to the Supreme Court and they want to reverse themselves. So kind of like a little bit of a safety net there. Yes, we know that this is a problem. We haven't addressed it. Go ahead and segment those votes out so that if it is a problem and we need to dump those votes, we will. Well, Pennsylvania was having some issues with that segmenting of the votes. They weren't doing it. And so this is where Justice Alito came into play. So that was his circuit. So he sent a different order, which again we covered here, that said, hey, I just heard that you losers are not segregating and segmenting these votes correctly. You better do that because I'm watching. So that's when a Supreme Court judge gets involved. It's sort of their monitoring of the situation. And that was him reaching out proactively, which is why I've been saying on this channel, Alito is not happy about this. If there's anybody on the Supreme Court who sort of telegraphed their position on it, it's Alito. He's not happy about it. And I think for good reason. So that's how they get involved. Now he's, I think, been reassigned. I'm not sure he's in that circuit anymore. I can't recall off the top of my head, but that's when they would get involved. They wouldn't necessarily go in and issue a ruling or issue an order, but what Alito was doing was going in and basically enforcing what the Supreme Court had previously ordered. And so that's how you'll see them kind of split up. Very good question. We have Obina Ibe. Good to see you, my friend. Sorry I butchered your name there. I'm so bad with names. He says, hey, Rob, wonderful show tonight, and I appreciate you. Thank you for that. I appreciate you being here, part of the program. Sorry about the name. People do it with my name all the time. Gruler, they can never get it. It's like it's, Gruler or I had a professor in law school who, this is a funny story. In law school, everybody says Mr. or Mrs., right? I call it Miss Faith. I still call it Faith, Miss Faith, because of habit from law school. It's Mr. this, Miss that, Mrs. whatever. So in law school, we had a substitute professor come in to teach some class. Never seen this lady before. No idea who she was. She's going around doing attendance, which we never did in law school, but she was doing attendance because for some reason. And she was going through and reading the names, and she got to my name. And I was on my laptop doing something, and she says, Mr. Johnson, are you here? Mr. Martin, are you here? No. Mr. Gruler? And I'm just typing away, like, minding my own business. Is there a Mr. Gruler here? Mr. Gruler. Everybody's looking around like, it's a small class. There's nobody here by the name of Gruler. Who the hell are you talking about? And it turns out she was looking for Mr. Gruler, which was me. And so finally, somebody was like, bro, I think she's talking about you. And you mean Gruler? So she thought my name was Robert Grulier, like a French actor or something like that. And it was pretty hilarious because for the rest of that semester, everybody was calling me Robert Grulier, like this really French name. So anyways, people do it with my name. I apologize for butchering yours. We have Tuwodi the linguist who says, justice is coming with military tribunals. Guantanamo Bay is busting. That's from Tuwodi the linguist. We have another one from Lubamir. Awesome. Thank you for that. He says, I meant the electoral college vote is objected. If the floor vote does not pass the House, but passes the Senate, are the votes thrown out? No, I don't. I do not believe so. So the way that the Congressional Research Service, you should read that whole thing. It's very, very fascinating. They go into a lot of depth on how this all works. But my understanding is that it's a bifurcated process, which means the presidency happens in the House and the vice presidency happens in the Senate. So they're sort of independent of one another. They work in conjunction. So if one side is going to challenge, you need somebody on the other side who's going to challenge. And if that happens, then at that point, if the floor vote does not pass the House but passes the Senate, it's a good question. I'm not sure what happens there. I think what would end up happening is the House would have to come to some sort of resolution. They have to come to a decision. Otherwise, we have the Presidential Succession Act, which comes into play. Pelosi becomes president. So the deadlines are going to be what forces a decision. Otherwise, the Constitution tells us what happens next. Neither one of the candidates becomes a president. We just defer to the House, which again is probably the most democratic entity in the federal government as it relates to the will of the people. Very good question. And something that I would like to dive into a little bit for Lubamir. We have Raina. Let's see here. We have Raina Crow says, did the PA legislature stiff the people and choose not to change anything with electors? I don't know specifically what the status is there. I don't think so. I think that there was that individual who sort of ran that first hearing out of Pennsylvania who said that there was a strong likelihood that he was going to introduce a bill to challenge that. Now, where that went, I don't know so much. I'm not paying as much attention to the legislatures as much as I am to some of the litigation and the lawsuit. Of course, I'm a lawyer, but I don't know where that stands, to be perfectly honest, Raina. And if they choose not to do anything with their electors, that's their prerogative. That's the legislature. They're inclined to do that. All right, we have, let's see, a couple other super chats. Oh my goodness, still coming in. I'm gonna have to pick up the pace here. He says, I meant by merely in South Carolina, when it comes to each chamber voting on the objection, if the Senate accepts the objection and the House rejects it. It's a good question. Yeah. So if there's a split in the House, so I think the House is the one that initiates it. If the Senate wants to object, but the House is not objecting, well, they decide the president. So you need it there. You need it. You absolutely need it in the House. The Senate, I'm not so sure on. I think you still need somebody in order to challenge, but whether they can come to a different conclusion, I don't really know how that works, to be frank. We have Brian Reinhardt who says, even without fraud, not complying with federal and state law, the Georgia election can be ruled as invalid. What are your thoughts on that? So whether it can be ruled invalid, I don't know if they can invalidate the entire election. So these are really complicated constitutional arguments. You're talking about due process. You're talking about equal protection of the law. I think that you're going to need to get a decision from the Supreme Court on some of those issues before you could ever invalidate an election like that. And we're all waiting with bated breath to see what the Supreme Court says. Thanks, Brian, for that question. We have Guy who says, asking, when the Constitution authorizes the use of force against the government seems incoherent. Why would a legal document provide means to throw out the law? No government would accept a coup in any case. Yeah, it's a good point, Guy. And the U.S. Constitution doesn't do that. They're not encouraging you to do that. If you're unhappy with your government, they provide a lot of mechanisms to change the government. It's called amendments, which is one of the reasons the Constitution is so brilliant, is because it gives us, the people, the power to go change the Constitution. Now, it makes it very difficult because we don't want sort of the tyranny of the majority. We don't want, the people to just, every time there's a change in the country's leadership, to just modify the entire structure of the country. So the founders, very wisely, in my opinion, made it difficult to amend the Constitution, very challenging to make any changes, and for good reason. So an amendment is appropriate. A constitutional convention is appropriate. Voting in regular elections is appropriate. Some of the other more, I think, aggressive approaches are not very useful. Adrian Hammond with a super chat, but no question. Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate you being here. We have Isaac Castillo who says, what are your thoughts on fractional voting? I haven't really spent a lot of time on that issue. Fractional voting, I think, is the idea that you can kind of split your vote. I think that's what you're asking, Isaac. Where you can kind of split your vote amongst candidates, and then there are different voting schemes where you can sort of prioritize your vote. So, you could go and you could vote for the Libertarian candidate, but we all know that they're not going to win. So if they don't win, then you could say, oh, okay, well, in that case, I'm not going to give my vote to them, but I'm going to give it to the next best candidate. So sort of prioritize your voting. And there's a lot of different voting schemes that many people have a lot of pros and cons for. I just haven't spent a lot of time in them, dissecting them. It's a good question, though, Isaac. Maybe that is part of the solution. We have Wolfgang Deo who says the Declaration of Independence says that only long-standing abuses should be overthrown. So if you can still petition peacefully, then you must. I think that's the right way to go about it, Wolfgang, for sure. Adrian Hammond says, let the government issue a voter credit to the bank account of every citizen with a valid social security number, so we can effect a wire transfer to the account of the candidate of our choice, done 24 hours. That's an interesting idea, actually. Yeah. Vote with your dollars with the valid social security number, wire transfer. It's an interesting idea. Pretty interesting idea there. Maybe $1 per person. See which candidate gets more dollars. Be interesting. We have Dennis Daly who says, can you please link the study document on the EC you've been talking about for me? I have learning disabilities and dyslexia. Yeah. So, we can absolutely pull that up for you. And I think it's Electoral College Congressional Research Service. If you plug that into your Google, I think you'll find it. But we can pull that for you, Dennis. Happy to do that. We have another super chat with language, which text with a name I can't even read. Is that Russian, I think? Hebrew? I don't know. I apologize. The underlying reasons for so much fraud is because those people know for sure that there will be zero responsibility for their actions. Yeah, exactly right. When I went through my hypothetical at the very beginning of the show, this is a long stream, but at the beginning of the program, I went through a hypothetical where I talked about how to rig an election. If you can go and you can literally go onto the Wisconsin website and request an absentee ballot without providing any voter ID, and they will mail you one, literally. How can you get caught on that? It's the government enabling you to do it. All you got to do is just go in there, request a ballot. You're going to get a bunch of them, send them to a bunch of addresses, vote them, right? And apparently, nobody cares. Judges throw the cases out. DOJ doesn't want to investigate anything. All the politicians are sitting on their hands saying, you're all crazy lunatics. Why wouldn't people continue to fraudulently influence the election? There's no repercussions for anybody thus far. We will see if that continues. All right, everybody. Well, listen, let me leave it right there because, that was a doozy of a stream. A lot of good material there, and I appreciate you all sticking with me so long. We have one more that just came in from C&E Barker. Just found your channel. Appreciate your excellent, unbiased breakdown of the issues. Shared this video on MeWe too. I never heard of that platform. Hope you get on Rumble too. You know, I did post a video on Rumble, and it was really difficult to post. I don't know what the deal was. It was like took forever to upload, and then it was processing for like 3 days. So I didn't upload any more over there, but it may have been a back end thing. I know it's a new platform, and I am excited about new platforms across the board. So thank you for that, C&E Barker. I appreciate you sending that over. And so I will leave it at there, everybody. I want to thank you so much for being a part of the program. A couple quick things before we sign off. If you're on the stream and you're not a regular of the program, we do go live every day at this time. We're usually done by now, but it's 5 p.m. Arizona Mountain Time. It's going to be 4 p.m. in California. It's going to be 6 p.m. Central over in Texas, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we want you to subscribe. We want you to hit the notification bell so that you join us as we go through these programs on a regular basis. I'm going to be here all next week except for Thursday and Friday. I'm going to start warning you on that. I have a big conference that I have to go to all day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I'm going to be missing next week, Thursday, Friday. Ugh, kills me. But it's important. It's going to be a good conference. I'm going to learn a lot. So I'm going to go do that next week. But ordinarily, I'm here every day of the week, and we're always covering the news. And I try to cover the stuff that's recent, you know, the stuff that we can kind of get to the day that it happens. We can give you some analysis at the close of your day. We want you to be here and be a part of that. Would really appreciate it if you shared the show. A lot of the time, this type of content is too controversial. YouTube sort of, you know, gives us hints here that it's socially controversial in terms of monetization and stuff. So they don't want, you know, they don't recommend this type of content as much as we would like them to. Of course, we want a lot of recommendations and suggested next video. So it'd be very helpful if you shared it with your friends, shared it with your family. We do have a Facebook page now, so you can just, you know, easy there. You just hit the share button, no problem at all. A like would be very helpful as well, because apparently that influences the algorithm, helps us show up in the recommended next videos. Would also appreciate that. If you want a copy of any of the slides or any of the materials that I covered today, check us out on Discord. You can head on over there. We Miss Faith posts the slides at the end of the program, and I'll usually stick around and we'll chat a little bit in our Discord server. The link should be in the description. And then finally, of course, our law firm. We have an awesome team of people here. Everybody here at the R&R Law Group, we're super passionate about helping good people. We just want to help people navigate through the justice system. I say it at the beginning of the show, but sometimes there are bumps in the road in our lives, and we need to help people navigate those. My vision of what a justice system looks like is people come out a little bit better at the other end. You know, we can still do justice without wrecking people's lives. And so we're passionate about helping that effect come into fruition for our clients. So if you know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, we can help. We would be honored if you would send them our way. We're ready and willing to help. And I will leave it at that one more time. Would love a subscribe from you. Otherwise, I'm going to wish you all a very, very nice evening. Stay warm, sleep well, and I will see you right back here tomorrow. Bye, everybody.